Hello, my name's Ranana. A few months ago, my parents told me to go die, right after my sister lost her job. They blamed me, threw me out of the house I helped them pay for. But what hurt more wasn't the screaming, it was the years before that. The quiet erasing, the fake documents, the debt in my name, the email my own father sent to sabotage my career. How do you survive a family that wants you gone, but never admits it out loud? Keep watching, and I'll show you how I turned the tables. It started at the dinner table. The air was thick, not with food, not even with words, but with something heavier. Thailand was slouched across from me, scrolling her phone, her lips tight with annoyance. She'd been fired that afternoon. No one said it directly, but we all knew. And in this house, knowing was more dangerous than speaking. Mom stirred her soup with unnecessary force, her bracelet clinking against the bowl like a warning bell. Dad, as always, stayed leaned back with his mug of black coffee, looking past the kitchen window like there was something important out in the darkness. Nobody looked at me. I kept my eyes on the salt shaker in front of me, replaying the email I'd read hours ago. The one I wrote, worded carefully for Tylene's HR complaint, never acknowledged, never used. The same way my help never was. That wasn't new, but tonight felt different. Charged. Like something was waiting to snap. Mom broke first. "So, you just let it happen?" she said, but not to Tylene. Her eyes drilled into me like I had fired my sister myself. I blinked. "I didn't even know—" "Of course you knew," Tylene snapped. "You always know what people are saying behind my back." "I've literally been working, at home, alone." Dad finally spoke. "You think you're better than us just because you have your little computer job?" I stared at him. "I've been paying part of this mortgage since 2019. "That was a favor. You were living here rent-free," he shot back. I felt my throat tighten, but I swallowed it down. I said nothing. I wasn't about to argue over basic math. That was my mistake. "You're such a leech," Tylene muttered, shoving her chair back. "If you had any decency, you'd leave. Go stay in one of your little internet apartments." "I didn't do anything to you," I said, softly but clear. "I helped you, again." Mom stood up. "Help? You want a medal for wiping your sister's mess? That's what family does. You think you're above that?" I stayed seated. She stepped closer, arms folded. "Why can't you just disappear already?" Her voice cracked the room. Dad didn't stop her. Tylene didn't flinch. My name wasn't even in the sentence, but it shattered me anyway. "Just go," she hissed. "Go die if you're so tired of us." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I stood up slowly and walked to my room, hands trembling, but steady enough to grab my bag. The one I always kept ready to leave with, just in case. They followed me. Or maybe they didn't. I don't really remember. I just recall the rain starting outside. That soft, miserable drizzle that soaks you without warning. I stepped out into it, holding a trash bag stuffed with clothes and nothing else. My laptop was gone. When I asked, Dad said flatly, "That's family property." My prescriptions, my documents, even my spare charger, gone or locked away. I had nothing in my hand but wet fabric and a house key that suddenly felt like a joke. By the time I reached the front gate, I heard the lock click behind me. I stood there for a second, maybe two, before walking down the street with no plan, no umbrella, and no pride. Maritza lived 20 minutes away if you cut through the church parking lot. I walked like a ghost. No cars passed, no dogs barked, just that drizzle and the sound of my sneakers on wet asphalt. When I knocked on her door, she opened it in a bathrobe and towel-dried hair. "Did something happen?" she asked. I forced a smile. "Just needed to crash. Won't be long." She nodded slowly and stepped aside. An hour later, I sat curled on her guest couch with a scratchy blanket and a bottle of water. She had gone to bed. The living room buzzed with the low hum of her fridge and the occasional creak of the heater. That's when the weight landed. Not the cold, not the rejection, not even the violence of the words. No, what hit me hardest was the silence. The fact that not one of them tried to stop it. Not one of them said, "That's enough." I sat there for what felt like hours, dripping, staring at the ceiling, hearing Mom's words echo over and over. Go die. You don't forget a sentence like that. You don't unhear it just because your ears stop ringing. At 9:20, I stood, grabbed my bag, and walked back out into the cold. I didn't want to be there when the house woke up again. I didn't want to be anywhere that made me small. I ended up at the bus stop near the gas station on Main. I sat down, curled the bag around my feet, and stared into the foggy streetlights. Nobody was coming. No ride, no miracle, no sudden apology. Just me, the night, and a silence louder than anything I'd ever known. I don't remember falling asleep. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I just passed out from exhaustion. Emotional or physical, hard to say. All I know is, by the time my eyes opened again, a soft gray light was leaking through the blinds of Maritza's guest room. The room was clean, quiet, impersonal. Beige walls, a folded towel at the foot of the twin bed, a framed print of a cactus above the dresser. Not one thing in it belonged to me. Not even the scent. It smelled like lavender detergent and someone else's piece. I sat up, still wearing the same clothes from 2 nights ago. I hadn't showered. My bag sat on the floor like a dead limb, half-zipped, holding the same things I carried out of my parents' house, none of them useful. I didn't cry. I just noticed the silence again. Not loud this time, just thick. In the kitchen, Maritza was already up, clinking around dishes like it was any other morning. The smell of buttered toast floated in from the hallway. "Morning," she said with a brightness that felt borrowed. "Hey!" My voice scraped. She poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to me without meeting my eyes. "Did you sleep okay?" "Fine." We sat for a while in the kitchen, her talking about a neighbor's dog who kept barking at 3 a.m. I nodded, smiled at the right places, made it through the motions, but she never once asked what happened, and I never offered. Midway through breakfast, she cleared her throat. "So, your mom called." I looked up. "She said you left the house in a panic, that you're not doing well." I took a sip of coffee that tasted like dust. "Of course she did." "She said you might need help." I stared at her. Did she mention telling me to die, or did she leave that part out? Maritza winced. "She said you were being dramatic." That word sat between us like a dare. I didn't rise to it, I just nodded. "Okay." She hesitated, then added, "I told her you were here, just for a night or two. I hope that's okay." It wasn't a question. I rinsed my cup and thanked her. I didn't ask to stay longer. I didn't beg. But I knew what was coming. That afternoon, she said the words I'd been waiting for. "I love you, Ranana, you know that. But it's just, things are complicated right now, and I need the space." "Sure," I said. "Thanks again." She gave me a long hug at the door. The kind of hug people give when they don't want to be the villain, but don't want you around either. I left with my bag and no destination. Again. The next day, an email popped into my inbox. Subject line, Family Healing Dinner. Location, Christ Redeemer Fellowship Hall. Time, Sunday at 5 p.m. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. A message from my mother with the line, "It would be good for everyone if you showed up and acted appropriately." I didn't reply, but something about it. It wasn't guilt exactly, maybe curiosity, maybe the need to see what the damage looked like from the outside. So I went. I wore black slacks and a navy blouse, nothing fancy, nothing that could be called dramatic. The church was decorated like someone had Googled non-denominational healing aesthetic. White candles, folding chairs, a banner that read, "Together Again." I walked in quietly. Heads turned, smiles were forced. And no one, absolutely no one, acknowledged the fact that 3 nights ago I'd been tossed out like a used napkin. Lorinda was at the front table, shaking hands like a senator. Vernon leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, wearing the same detached expression he wore the night I left. Tylene found me first. Of course she did. There you are, she said, all sugar and performance. You're so strong, sis. She wrapped her arms around me before I could react. I didn't hug her back. She pulled away, still smiling for the audience. So proud of how you're handling everything. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I was too busy trying to stay upright in a room that had decided my absence never happened. I found a seat near the back, watched as they played a slideshow of family memories. None of them included me. People clapped. A few whispered condolences about the misunderstanding. Someone passed me a printed program. I opened it. Inside was a family photo, taken a few weeks ago. Smiling faces, coordinated outfits. I wasn't in it. I flipped the page. My name wasn't listed under beloved daughter, just Lorinda, Vernon, and Tylene. As if I'd never been part of it at all. I didn't cry. I didn't tear it up. I folded the paper slowly and slipped it into my purse. Not because I wanted to keep it, but because I needed to remember how thorough they were when they erased me. No screaming, no scene, just quiet deletions. Sometimes betrayal doesn't shout, it whispers in a room full of applause. After the church dinner, I walked back to the place I'd been renting, a room in a shared house near the university. It wasn't home, just a temporary solution, with a lock on the door and enough square footage to sleep without worrying who might open it next. I slipped off my shoes, hung my coat, and stood for a moment in the silence. My purse was still under my arm, heavier now with that program. The one with my face absent, my name conveniently omitted, my entire existence edited out like I'd been some unfortunate footnote in a family album. I set it down on the little desk by the window and stared at it. Then I turned to the small storage bin I'd shoved in the closet when I moved in. A box that had followed me from every place I'd lived since college, never unpacked, never touched. I didn't know why I was reaching for it now. Maybe because pretending I didn't care had stopped working. The lid creaked open, revealing a stack of old letters, cords to devices I no longer owned, and one journal. Black leather cover, scuffed edges, bent spine. My name was scratched into the corner with a paperclip when I was 15. I sat on the floor and let it fall open naturally. It landed on a page near the back, creased, with a folded corner. March 3rd. I bled on the carpet today. My breath caught. The handwriting was mine, but the words looked foreign now. I read on. Tylene screamed about the laundry. I didn't answer fast enough. She threw the remote, but it missed. Then she slapped me, twice. I didn't cry until I saw the blood on the rug. I remembered the day, vividly. Not the hit. That had faded. But the quiet that followed. How I'd been made to apologize for being overly sensitive. How Mom had sighed and said, "Just don't provoke her next time." Dad hadn't even looked up from the TV. I flipped back a few pages. There were more entries like that. None as explicit. Just implications. Bruises without sources. Tension described like weather. Moments I had convinced myself didn't matter. I had never shown this to anyone. Never needed to. I thought I had moved past it. But tonight, in the wake of being cut out like a tumor no one wanted to acknowledge, the pattern clicked into place. They hadn't just erased me from photos or programs. They'd started years ago. Quietly. Efficiently. By making me the problem, then calling my silence grace. I reached for my phone, took a photo of the journal page, and added it to a folder in my cloud drive labeled Untold. Not revenge. Just proof. I wasn't crying, not this time. I was tired, sure, but there was a clarity that sat in my chest like a brick. Heavy, yes, but solid. I thought about the times I was blamed for a broken plate, even though I'd been out of the house. The times I'd been sent to my room when the argument wasn't even mine. The phrase, "don't escalate things," being used as code for, "don't defend yourself." It wasn't keeping the peace, it was keeping me quiet. I reached for a pen and flipped to a blank page. She hit me. They saw. They said I was overreacting. I'm not pretending anymore. I closed the journal, slid it back into the box, and tucked it deep into the closet. Then I walked over to my laptop and added the scanned page to the legal folder Jolene had helped me set up. It sat next to the mortgage file, the debt notice I never signed, and the note from Tylene's former boss, thanking me for my editing help on an HR report she submitted. Each piece wasn't dramatic, but together they formed a truth that couldn't be repainted with apologies or Sunday dinners. I wasn't building a case out of spite. I was building a history they couldn't rewrite. That memory didn't hurt because it was old. It hurt because I still believed I deserved it. The following morning, I woke up with a knot in my chest that hadn't formed overnight. It had been settling there for years. I got dressed slowly, avoiding the mirror. I didn't need to see my face to know what was sitting behind my eyes. After a quick breakfast in the shared kitchen, I made my way to the library downtown. It wasn't far, just a 10-minute walk, but the air had that dry bite only Texas winters manage. The kind that doesn't feel like weather, just warning. I chose a desk near the back, away from the students and their finals week chaos. I needed quiet, focus. There was something gnawing at me, something I couldn't name yet, but my gut was telling me I'd missed something bigger. I pulled out my laptop, connected to the library's guest Wi-Fi, and started digging. At first, I was just checking on my accounts. I'd gotten into the habit ever since being pushed out of the house, half out of paranoia, half out of necessity. But as I scrolled through the familiar logins, I paused. A tiny voice in my head whispered, "What if your name's already been used somewhere else?" So I opened a public financial record database, one I remembered from an old job. I typed in my name, my last known address, and the state. 2 entries popped up. Small business loans, both delinquent, both under my social security number. I stared at the screen. One had been opened while I was still abroad, presenting at a data conference in Berlin. The second was listed as joint use, linked to an address I hadn't lived at in nearly 5 years. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, cold but steady. I downloaded the records and saved them to the same legal folder I'd been quietly building. I didn't cry, didn't panic, because deep down I already knew. Tylene, she had access. She always found a way to have access, and she was bold enough to think she could bury it under the idea that we were family. I left the library 2 hours later and walked a few blocks to a small coffee shop I liked. Quiet, unassuming, the kind of place where no one asked what you were working on. There, I opened my old Gmail account, the one I hadn't touched in years. Just curiosity at first, then habit, and then, there it was. A chain of emails between Tylene and a coworker, dated around the same time I'd helped her tweak her resume. I remembered reviewing it late one night, fixing the wording so it sounded less angry, but still strong. Her words, not mine. The email thread wasn't just work banter. It was condescending, dismissive, casual in the way people are when they think no one will ever read their words. If anyone asks, I'll say my sister helped double-check the numbers, but I made the decisions. Obviously. Further down, one line stood out. I told her it was just data cleanup, but she basically rewrote half the report. Oh well. I sat back in my chair. So that's what I was to her. An invisible assistant. The person she used when she needed polish, then discredited as soon as the ink dried. I forwarded the thread to my main inbox. Attached a note. For lawyer only. That night, I scheduled a meeting with Jolene. When I walked into her office the next morning, I didn't start with tears or a rant. I just opened my laptop, pulled up the folder, and turned it toward her. These are the files I've collected: identity misuse, potential fraud, and an ongoing pattern of reputational damage. Jolene looked through them carefully, her fingers moving steadily over the trackpad. She nodded slowly. We can work with this. No lawsuit yet, but a declaration of ownership, identity protection, and if necessary, cease and desist letters. I don't want to take them down, I said. I just don't want to keep being erased. Jolene met my eyes. That's not a small thing you're asking for. I know. We finalized the plan. Document everything. Backup copies, digital timestamps, cross-reference dates and usage. No confrontation, no shouting match in public. Just the quiet building of a case no one could refute. I left her office just before noon, stepping out into a sky that looked friendly, sunny, cloudless. But I knew better. Some days, storms don't come with thunder. They arrive as paperwork. It wasn't just my name she stole. She'd borrowed my silence for years. 2 days passed in a rhythm that didn't quite feel like mine. I went through motions, work, coffee, sleep, but everything beneath it pulsed with a different beat. A pulse made of facts I'd uncovered, pages I'd scanned, things I could no longer pretend were misunderstandings. On the third morning, Jolene called. "I've been thinking," she said. "If your name was ever on the original deed, and we can prove it was removed improperly, that's enough to establish legal leverage." I didn't answer right away. She continued, "Not a lawsuit, not yet, just pressure, strategic pressure." I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Then we start there." That afternoon, I drove to the bank branch near downtown. The same one where I'd once co-signed a cashier's check, back when Tylene was unemployed and our parents were trying to avoid foreclosure. I remembered sitting beside my mother in the waiting area while she made small talk with the teller about weather and all these complicated adult things. Inside, I waited at the front desk while a young woman, barely 20, paged a supervisor. A few minutes later, an older staff member appeared, her badge reading Noreen. "I think I remember you," she said with a polite smile. "It's been a few years." I explained the situation carefully. She listened without interrupting, then nodded once and walked off to search the archives. 10 minutes later, she returned with a sealed envelope and laid it in front of me. "This was scanned and stored digitally, but this is the original record from the purchase," she said, sliding it over. "It includes both signatures, yours and your father's." I opened the envelope slowly, and there it was. My name, in blue ink, right beside Vernon's, the purchase agreement, the down payment contribution, my initials in 3 places. I didn't smile, didn't say much, just stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. I thanked her, took a photo, and left with the envelope zipped tight inside my laptop sleeve. Back at Jolene's office, we drafted a notarized statement. Declaration of financial interest and co-ownership. No dramatics, no accusations, just documentation. When we finished, I asked her for 2 printed copies, one for my records, one to deliver. By dusk, I was back at the house on Clementine Drive, the house I once helped keep afloat. I didn't knock, I didn't go inside. I simply slid the envelope through the front mail slot, along with a note I'd handwritten the night before. It said, "I won't ask again." I waited for nothing, walked back to my car, drove away. The call came later that night, around 9:30. My phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen on screen since the day they threw me out. Vernon. I let it ring once before answering. "You really think paperwork changes anything?" he said. His voice was clipped, like someone forcing calm through gritted teeth. I kept my tone neutral. "It means I exist, on record, legally, permanently." He snorted. "You always were a handful, you just didn't know when to stop." "I did stop," I replied. "I stopped waiting for you to see me." There was a long pause. I could hear him breathing. "Ungrateful little—" I ended the call before he finished. I didn't throw the phone, didn't scream. Instead, I opened my laptop, scanned the deed a second time, uploaded it to 3 separate folders, and labeled it, Anchor Copy, Do Not Edit. Then I emailed a duplicate to Jolene with a timestamp and digital signature. Just in case. Because some people don't burn bridges. They quietly build new ones behind your back, hoping you never turn around. They thought I was quiet because I was weak, but I was quiet because I had receipts. 2 nights after Vernon's call, I found myself wide awake at 3:17 a.m., staring at the ceiling. It wasn't the insomnia that bothered me. It was what kept coming back. A sentence. A single thought. What else did they wipe clean? By mid-morning, I was back at the public library, tucked into a private study room I'd come to rely on. The usual noise. Printers spitting pages, whispers between students, the rolling thuds of chairs, blurred into background static. I logged into my archived Gmail account again, this time focused on the sent folder. But not just the main one. I checked the recovery logs and partial backups tied to my old devices. It took longer than I expected, scanning through hundreds of autosaved drafts, half-written messages, and old scholarship essays. And then, I found it. Dated April 2nd, 2 years ago. Subject line: Formal apology letter. Urgent. It was addressed to Tylene's HR department. Every line was careful, measured, professional. The kind of language I'd spent a decade learning how to wield. Soft enough to sound empathetic, firm enough to suggest accountability without collapse. And it was never sent. Worse, the copy had been overwritten with a new draft. One that painted her as a victim of office politics, blaming internal confusion, and vaguely alluding to a troubled sibling as the source of distraction. I froze. The recovery metadata showed the last user logged into the device that edited the file wasn't me. It was Lorinda. She had used the shared laptop, the one we all passed around like a family dog bowl, to access my account. She deleted my version, replaced it with one that erased my effort, and subtly implicated me. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, hands cold despite the heater buzzing behind me. It was never about truth. It was about optics. Always had been. By the time I returned to my apartment that evening, the sky had darkened into that early winter gray that makes everything feel heavier. I tossed my coat over the chair and pulled up the local records database Jolene had mentioned. A quick search. Name: Ra'Nana Ellis. Address: 47 Clementine Drive. No matching result. I blinked, tried again, changed spelling variations. Nothing. Then I searched the registry for that address. Only 2 occupants listed, Vernon and Tylene. No mention of Lorinda, no trace of me. I called the county clerk's office to verify. After a short hold, a tired-sounding woman confirmed it. We have no active residence listing associated with your name for that property. Looks like a change was processed about 8 months ago. 8 months ago. Before the fight. Before the screaming. Before they told me to disappear. They'd erased me on paper before they ever did it out loud. That wasn't neglect. That was intention. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stared at the screen while my fingertips hovered over the mouse, like my body needed a moment to catch up. Eventually, I stood, grabbed a glass of water, and paced for a few minutes. The stillness in the apartment made the truth echo louder. They had cut me out without a word. And if I hadn't been documenting, if I hadn't been curious enough, stubborn enough, I never would have known. I turned to my laptop and created a new cloud folder: Legal, Reentry and Identity Restoration. Inside, I uploaded the recovery log of the deleted apology with timestamps, the registry screenshots, the call transcript from the clerk's office, all of it labeled, cross-referenced, tagged. Then I added a single-line email to Jolene. Silence is done. This wasn't revenge, it was accuracy. Because they hadn't just told the world I was unstable. They'd engineered the proof. And now, it was my turn to engineer something they didn't expect. A version of events they couldn't twist, water down, or smile through at church luncheons. They wanted me out of the house. Now, I was going to remove their version of me from the story. Jolene's number flashed across my phone before sunrise the following Tuesday. I hadn't even poured my first cup of coffee. "There's a problem," she said. I was already slipping on my shoes. 10 minutes later, we sat across from each other in her office, blinds still drawn. Her screen showed a digital copy of a property transfer application dated 5 days prior. My family home. Filed without my signature. No mention of my partial ownership. The listed seller was Vernon. The buyer? A distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A straw buyer, Jolene said plainly. They're trying to move the asset before you can act. She typed quickly, filing an emergency injunction while explaining next steps. I watched her work, absorbing every click, every sentence. My hands stayed in my lap. They thought you wouldn't check, she added. No, they thought I'd still be scared to. By noon, the sale was frozen, temporarily. But the message was clear. They were escalating, and so was I. That afternoon, I took a walk to clear my head. I wasn't far from campus and found myself tracing the path I used to take after lectures. I paused at a bench near the old student center, checked my email, and noticed a reply I hadn't expected. 3 months earlier, I'd applied for a position at a consulting firm in Dallas. I hadn't gotten so much as an interview. I had sent a follow-up last week out of curiosity, not out of hope. The response included an attached memo, redacted, but revealing enough. It read, "This applicant may be emotionally unstable. Family sources report ongoing disputes and mental health concerns. Caution advised." My stomach sank. The phrasing felt eerily familiar. The metadata on the email showed it came from an anonymous account, but the tone, the cadence, the slight condescension, it read like something Vernon would say behind closed doors. Like the things he'd mutter over dinner when no one else was around. Words that didn't come from concern, but control. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. I downloaded the memo and dropped it into the digital file labeled Defamation Internal. That night, I booked a 2-hour slot at a podcast booth downtown, the kind rented by influencers and burned-out grad students. I wasn't going in to make a show. I was building something I could archive, submit, timestamp, something no one could delete. I closed the door behind me, put on the headset, and hit record. "This is for legal documentation," I said. My voice didn't shake. "This is for the person who's been told to be the bigger person over and over until she forgot she existed at all." I spoke plainly. I read the facts. The forged deed transfer, the debt in my name, the deleted apology email, the family registry edit, the anonymous tip that cost me a career opportunity. I didn't name names. I didn't scream. Because none of this was for them. It was for the record. I saved the file, uploaded it to Jolene's archive, marked it with the date and title, Restoration Part 1. When I left the booth, the air outside had turned bitter, a cold front sweeping through, the kind that bit at your bones without apology. But something in me had shifted. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was running. I was documenting, preserving, refusing to vanish. This wasn't just about a house anymore. This was about every version of me they tried to kill without leaving a mark. I didn't rush. That morning, I folded my clothes slowly, ironed the only decent blouse I hadn't boxed up, and laid out a plain envelope on the kitchen counter. The printer hummed behind me, pushing out one final sheet. My own edition. A copy of a thank you email, dated 2 years ago, sent by someone who no longer worked at the firm that had once let my sister carry my words like they were hers. By noon, I was in the car, driving across town under a low-hanging sky. It was Lorinda's birthday. I hadn't been invited, didn't expect to be, but I didn't need an invitation to walk into a house I had helped save. They were already gathered when I pulled up. Cars lined the driveway. I parked on the curb and shut the engine off without checking the mirror. No nerves, no hesitation, just purpose. Inside, the living room buzzed with fake joy, laughter that didn't quite echo, distant aunts balancing paper plates on their knees. A store-bought cake with pink frosting sat untouched on the counter. My mother stood near the dining table, holding a glass of wine and an expression too neutral to be real. Conversations dropped as I stepped in. Some turned their heads. Some pretended not to see me. Nobody said my name. I didn't explain myself. I walked to the table, placed the sealed envelope down in the center, and said, "Your copy, it's all there." Lorinda blinked. Vernon narrowed his eyes. Tylene looked amused, like I was performing for someone. No one moved to open it. I didn't wait. I turned to leave, but paused halfway to the door. "There's also a copy of the scholarship disbursement in there. It covered $18,400. That was mine." Tylene's smile cracked just slightly. "You're talking about that student fund?" she said too lightly. "Mom said they canceled it because of budget cuts." "Funny, because the funds were paid out, directly toward your credit card debt." I heard a fork clink onto a plate somewhere behind me. I wasn't done. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper, the last page from the print run that morning. "I know most of you don't check your email," I said, "so I figured I'd bring this one with me." I handed it directly to Vernon. He glanced at it, scoffed, and set it on the table without a word. Tylene leaned forward, scanning it upside down. I watched her face shift, just barely, when she recognized the subject line. "Thanks to your sister, I didn't get fired." Her former boss had written it after I ghost wrote the final HR report that saved his reputation. Tylene had submitted it under her name. I never saw my contribution again. Lorinda cleared her throat. "You know, this isn't the time." "No," I said. "You made sure I never had one." Silence followed, the kind that reveals more than words ever could. "I was told to be quiet," I continued, "to keep the peace, not to embarrass anyone, so I didn't. I let you pretend. I let you rename things." I tapped the envelope once before turning back toward the door, but I kept the receipts. No one stopped me. No one called out. Outside, the air felt heavier than when I'd walked in, but my chest didn't. I got into my car, started the engine, and didn't look back. Not toward the house, not toward the people in it. I didn't drive anywhere in particular. I just drove. Past the old movie theater, past the grocery store where I used to run errands for a family that never saw me. And somewhere along that drive, it stopped mattering if they ever apologized. Because I wasn't looking for remorse anymore. I never needed them to be sorry. I just needed them to stop pretending I didn't exist. The sun had finally found its way through the haze. It wasn't warm exactly, but it was steady, an ordinary winter light that didn't ask to be noticed. 3 weeks had passed since I dropped the envelope on the birthday table. 3 weeks without a word from them. Not a call, not an email, not even a rumor. I was folding laundry one afternoon when I noticed the small padded envelope wedged between the pizza coupons and a gas bill in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in a style I hadn't seen since high school. Inside was a flash drive. I knew better than to plug it in directly. I scanned it on a separate device I kept for cases like this. The file was named sorry.mp4, an apology dressed up like a Trojan horse. I played it. Tylene appeared on the screen, sitting cross-legged in what looked like my old bedroom. My comforter, my posters, my ghost. "I guess you think you've won," she began, her tone too smooth to be sincere. "But here's the thing. You were never supposed to matter this much. You were always the backup plan, the one who filled in when everyone else failed." She tilted her head, fake concern dripping from every word. "You think you're brave now? You're just loud. You only sound strong because you stayed silent for so long. But that wasn't strength. That was compliance." Then she laughed. Soft, mocking. I didn't react. I didn't even blink. Because the moment I saw her face on that screen, I realized something important. This wasn't her taking accountability. It was her trying to reclaim the version of me she had helped destroy. I copied the file into the cloud folder. Labeled it Confession Unsolicited. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to respond. It wasn't my job to manage her perception anymore. Later that week, Jolene and I walked into the courthouse together. No drama, no cameras, just a hallway that smelled like paper and polish, and the sound of shoes echoing down tile floors. We filed 3 documents. The first, a correction of property ownership records, acknowledging my original financial contribution and restoring my legal rights to the deed. The second, an affidavit affirming identity misuse, tied to the unauthorized debts and digital tampering that had cost me opportunities I hadn't even known I'd lost. The third, a declaration of name reinstatement, removing the quiet legal erasure Vernon and Lorinda had filed behind my back. Jolene looked at me after the last one was stamped and said, "You're officially on record." I exhaled. Not relief, not victory, completion. That weekend, I moved into a small brick house at the edge of town. 1 story, no shared walls. A garden out back I wasn't sure what to do with yet. I unpacked slowly. No rush, no audience. There were no family photos on the shelves, no hand-me-down furniture, just me and my things and the life I was building deliberately. On one wall, I hung a floating shelf with 2 items, a folder labeled Untold, and a framed print that read, "Don't let them write your version." I didn't put it there to remember the pain. I put it there to remind myself who I became after it. That evening, I opened a window and let the cold air settle around me, like a truth I'd stopped trying to change. I didn't need forgiveness. I didn't need reconciliation. What I had now was fact and space, and they don't get to rewrite me anymore. That job belongs to me now. Before we end this story, I want to leave you with something real. If you've ever been erased, quietly, politely, systematically, you'll understand what I mean when I say silence can be a strategy, but it should never be a sentence. I didn't raise my voice to get even. I raised it to get free. I used to think love meant staying, fixing, enduring. But I've learned that sometimes love looks like drawing a line, protecting what's left of your peace, and walking away with your name intact. So here's what I'd ask you to carry forward. Don't let anyone rewrite your story just because they're louder, older, or better at pretending. Your story matters. Even the chapters they tried to skip. Especially those. And now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been made to feel like a guest in your own family? Did you ever have to fight quietly, just to be seen? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story touched something in you. Or just tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who's on the other side of this screen. And if this video moved you, even just a little, consider subscribing. Your support helps me keep sharing stories that dig deep, make us think, and remind us we're not alone. So hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay strong, stay grounded, and never forget. You own your story, not them.
Hi, I'm Aelith, and I wasn't dying. But I begged, "Please, I can't breathe." And my mother, she didn't ask where I was or if I was okay. She asked if I was dying, then she hung up the phone. Turns out, my sister's breakup was more urgent than my body bleeding on an ER table. They left me there, alone. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they'd been doing that my whole life. Silently, cleanly, legally. So how does a family get away with erasing their own daughter while still expecting her to pay the bills? Would you have opened the door if it were your sister crying in the rain? Would you have answered if it were your father's heart failing? Because I didn't. And this is why. I don't remember the sound of the collision. Not exactly. Not the screech of tires, not the glass exploding. What I remember is the absence that followed, that deep, hollow silence when all the noise had already done its damage and you're still trying to decide if you're alive. Then came the sting, sharp and raw across my leg, and something wet in my mouth. Blood, maybe, or fear. My eyes fluttered open to a ceiling I didn't recognize. Fluorescent lights, harsh and humming. I couldn't lift my head, couldn't make out the voices around me. One was saying something about internal bleeding. Another called out a code I didn't understand. I wanted to ask where I was, but my mouth didn't obey. My chest heaved like I was drowning in open air. They wheeled me down endless corridors, the kind that buzz with activity but feel completely alone. A nurse asked if I could hear her. I blinked, barely. She squeezed my hand. I think she was trying to comfort me, but all I felt was the pressure of bones barely holding together. Somewhere between the hallway and the examination room, they pulled my phone from my pocket. It was cracked down the center, spidering across the screen like my thoughts. I don't know why, but my fingers moved on instinct. Emergency contact. Mom. Dad. I hit call. It rang. No answer. I hit it again. Voicemail. One more try. This time, my mother picked up. "What's wrong?" "We're in the middle of something," she said, a whisper of annoyance already in her voice. I tried to speak, but my throat tightened. I pushed the words out like gravel. "Please, I can't breathe." She paused, and then came the words I will never forget. Not because they were cruel, but because they were said so casually, like she was asking me to pick up milk from the store. "Are you really dying, Aelith? Because Isolde just had a complete meltdown. Her boyfriend left her this morning. She's spiraling, honey. We need to keep her grounded." I couldn't speak, not even to plead. The line went silent for half a second, and then disconnected. She hung up. I stared at the phone in my hand, heart racing in a way no monitor could catch. It didn't beep or blare. It just thudded quietly, each beat echoing louder than the last. The screen dimmed, my hand trembled, and in that moment I realized something awful. They weren't coming. A nurse walked back in. Her face was soft, kind. "Is anyone on their way, sweetheart?" I nodded before I even thought. A lie slipped out, not to protect them, but to protect myself from the shame of admitting no one cared enough to be here. She smiled. "Okay, I'll check back soon. You just rest, all right?" I watched her leave. I kept staring at the doorway long after she disappeared, waiting for the shadow of someone familiar to fill it. A dad's worried voice. A mom's nervous energy. A sister, maybe. I would have taken anyone who knew my middle name. But the door stayed empty. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel angry. I felt stripped, like something had been carved out of me and tossed down the drain. Not pain I could handle. I've broken bones before. This was something else. This was being unseen, unchosen. I tried to piece together what had happened. Not the crash, but the part that hurt more. The part where my own mother heard my breath hitch and decided my sister's heartbreak was more urgent. What did it mean? That I was strong, that I'd always been strong, so they assumed I'd figure it out, even now. Or maybe it meant I was forgettable, that they'd gotten so used to me taking care of myself, they didn't remember what I sounded like when I needed them. My mind kept looping those 6 words. "Are you really dying, Aelith?" If I had said yes, would it have mattered? Would they have come? Would they have dropped the drama of my sister's latest soap opera to rush to the hospital where their daughter was laid out with a crushed leg and a fractured rib? I knew the answer. Deep down, I always knew. The beeping of machines beside me was the only thing that gave rhythm to the hours that followed. Night crept in through the blinds. Nurses came and went. One brought me a blanket. Another checked my IV. No one asked why I hadn't had visitors. By the time midnight rolled around, I wasn't just lying in a hospital bed. I was lying in a truth I had spent years denying. That I wasn't the daughter they chose to worry about. That no matter how dependable I had been, I would never be the emergency. The thought didn't make me cry. It didn't even make me sad. It made me still. I stared at the ceiling, at the specks and stains no one noticed. And slowly, I let myself believe what I had always known, but never dared to say out loud. I could disappear, and it would be days before anyone checked. The nurse came in one last time, adjusting my monitor. "Still no one coming?" she asked softly. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I managed was a whisper. I think something just broke in me that'll never grow back. The monitors beside my bed kept up their steady rhythm, but I barely noticed anymore. The pain meds hadn't knocked me out the way the nurse expected. Maybe I was just used to operating on autopilot, even when everything hurt. Maybe I was tired of being unconscious in more ways than one. I stared at the ceiling, the same blank tiles I'd counted during the previous night, only now the light was softer. That strange glow hospitals cast after visiting hours end and everyone not dying tries to sleep. But I wasn't dying. And not technically, and maybe that was the problem. They only show up when someone's falling apart in a way they can see. I shifted slightly, careful not to aggravate the pain in my leg. Even that dull throb was easier to manage than the other kind, the one digging into my chest like splinters under the skin. I couldn't stop hearing her voice. "Are you really dying?" "No, Mom. I'm not dying. I'm just realizing I've been invisible to you for 3 decades. A memory crept in. Uninvited, but not unfamiliar. I was 10. We had balloons tied to the porch, streamers hanging across the garage door, and a vanilla cake with bright blue frosting that said, "Happy birthday, Aelith." I remember the candles, 10 tall ones, and me waiting for the cue to blow them out. But before I could, Isolde let out a sob. She didn't fall, didn't scrape her knee, didn't get stung by a bee. She just stood there, staring at the cake, tears spilling down her face. She whispered something about how it wasn't fair that she didn't get a party too. My mother rushed to her side like she'd been shot. "It's okay, baby," she cooed. "It's just a party. We'll do something special for you next weekend." Then she turned to me, not angry, just firm. "Be understanding, sweetie. She's more sensitive. She doesn't handle things like you do." The party was over within 15 minutes. No candles blown, no gifts opened. They boxed up the cake and gave me the "just be flexible" look. I was 10. What was I going to do, throw a tantrum? That would have made me the difficult one. So I smiled. I always smiled. Even when my name got taken off the invitations. Even when my birthday turned into an afterthought. I blinked back to the present, still staring at that ceiling, still waiting for someone to call and ask if I needed anything. No one did. I reached for my phone, careful not to disturb the IV taped to the back of my hand. It lit up immediately. No missed calls, no new messages. I unlocked it and opened my bank app out of habit, mostly because I needed to feel like I was in control of something. Scrolling through the last few months of transfers felt like self-harm. $600 to Mom. Emergency repairs. $450 to Isolde. Therapy copay. $100 to Dad's checking. Tax mistake. He swears he'll return it. Line after line after line of quiet giving. Not once had I been paid back. Not once had I been acknowledged. It was like I'd been a ghost with a debit card. I opened my email, searched for reimburse. Nothing came up. Then, just to see what I already knew, I searched thank you. One message. From a coworker last year after I covered her presentation. From my family? Not a word. I closed my eyes and let the nausea settle. They'd built their comfort on my silence, my predictability, my inability to say no. And every time I felt that sting of being overlooked, I'd remind myself, it's because they think I'm strong. But strength shouldn't mean disposable. Another memory hit. This one from college. I'd won a statewide academic competition. My name was printed in the local paper. The award ceremony was an hour away, and I asked my parents to come. Isolde had a panic attack that morning because of a B- on her psych midterm. They didn't come. "Be fair," Mom said. "Your sister needed us more." No pictures of me on stage, no family dinner afterward. Just a plastic trophy and an empty inbox. And still, I let it go. I always let it go. Another notification pulled me back. Instagram. Isolde had posted photos from her new art exhibit. I knew the gallery. I paid the booking fee, quietly, anonymously, because she said she'd have a meltdown if the venue rejected her again. Underneath the photo, our mother had commented, "Proud of my girl who built this from the ground up." No tag, no mention, not even a nod. I scrolled through the comments. "You're amazing! How do you do it all? She's got such resilience." And Isolde, ever the poetic fraud, replied, "Just pushing through. It's been such a hard year, but I made it." I should have been angry, furious, ready to storm the comments section, but instead, I set the phone down and stared at the ceiling again. What good would it do? They'd just tell me I was jealous, that I was making a scene. No one ever likes the sibling who points out the favoritism, even when it's burning through the walls like wildfire. I exhaled slowly, pain blooming again near my ribs. The morphine drip beeped softly, trying to do its job. But the thing is, no medication touches this kind of ache. I wasn't dying, but I was done. Done performing strength so they could call it stability. Done pretending that being left off the thank you card was just an oversight. Done sending money so they could call it love. I looked around the room. It was quiet, dim. My reflection in the monitor screen didn't even look like me anymore. Somewhere out there, my family was pretending I was okay, just like they always had. Pretending I didn't mind, that I didn't feel the sting when they overlooked me, that I didn't notice how Isolda's breakdowns earned sympathy and mine earned silence, and they'd do it again tomorrow, and next month, and next year. Unless I changed something. Unless I disappeared. Not literally, not dramatically, just emotionally, legally, financially, completely. If they don't see me after everything I've done, I whispered, more to the ceiling than to myself, maybe I need to disappear for real. I didn't sleep after hitting send on the email to Delora. I just lay there, my body still pinned to the mattress by pain and medication, but my mind wide awake, sharper than it had been in weeks. The hospital room was quiet, except for the occasional shuffle of nurses down the hallway and the low hum of machines beside my bed. At some point, the air conditioner kicked on, blowing cool air into the already chilled space. Goosebumps prickled along my arms, but I didn't reach for the blanket. I needed the discomfort to match what was twisting inside. I turned my phone screen on again, even though I knew nothing new would be there. No messages, no missed calls. But the silence gave me permission to go looking elsewhere, in places I had purposely avoided until now. I opened my email and searched for a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside it were a handful of documents Dad had sent me when I was in grad school. Financial agreements. A copy of the old will. I clicked open the PDF with the heading, Nyland Property Distribution, Initial Draft. Page 3. My name was there, clear as day. Co-heir to the house in Lake Oswego, equal shares with Isolda. I remembered him saying, just in case something ever happens, you girls will each have a piece of something solid. It felt fair, once upon a time, back when I still believed I was part of their long-term picture. Then I remembered the shared Google Drive I'd stumbled into weeks earlier while trying to help Isolda apply for another grant. There'd been a document tucked into the family archive folder. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. But now I reopened the drive, scrolled past the family vacation photos and scanned tax returns, and found the file, Finalized Nyland Estate 2022 PDF. My name wasn't on it, not even in the footnotes. I stared at the screen, my heart pacing. It didn't thud with surprise, more like a slow, bitter throb of confirmation. I was no longer part of their legacy, not even on paper. What made it worse was knowing the change had been made months ago. No conversation, no courtesy, just deleted, quietly, like I'd died without them noticing. I could almost hear the excuse before it was spoken. Honey, you already have your own place. You're stable. Isolda needs the security more than you. They always framed it like compassion, like choosing her wasn't really not choosing me. It was just being pragmatic. Empathetic, balanced, except that was a lie dressed in warm tones. It was preference, repackaged and justified. A buzz from my phone broke the trance. A notification from Facebook. I opened it, more out of habit than interest. There she was. My sister, smiling at her laptop, holding a coffee mug, captioned, Pushing through even the hard days. Submitted my first full grant proposal on my own today. Grateful for the strength to keep going. And beneath it, Vera's comment. So proud of our Isolda. She's come such a long way. Nobody fights harder. I blinked, not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. That proposal, I wrote it, every line, every paragraph. I edited her typos, reworked the budget table, formatted the citations. She had texted me in a panic at 10 p.m., the night before the deadline, saying she couldn't think straight and needed me to just look it over. She'd cried, said she couldn't afford to mess it up, that she'd spiral again. And, like always, I stepped in and fixed it. And now she was posing like a self-made success, and Mom was beaming like she'd raised a warrior. My name, of course, was nowhere in the story. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the blanket with a soft thud. That was the moment it all became undeniable. This wasn't about one Facebook post or a line in a will. It was about a lifetime of being written out of the narrative, while simultaneously being written into every bill, every bailout, every behind-the-scenes cleanup. I was the ghost who held their lives together. The only time my name appeared in family threads or messages was at the end of a sentence that began with, "Can you help us out just this once?" There was always a reason: a job loss, a therapist's invoice, a flat tire, a rent hike, a crisis. And me? I never had a crisis big enough to compete. I just handled things, quietly, consistently, invisibly. I opened my contacts, scrolled, Mom, Dad, Isolde. Not one message in the last 48 hours. Not one, "Are you okay?" Not one, "We're sorry." I hovered my thumb over each name, tempted to delete them. But something in me paused. Not because I wanted to keep the connection, but because I wanted a record of its absence. Instead, I clicked into my father's contact and edited his name. From Dad to donor, not Dad. It felt petty, but also weirdly empowering. I wasn't trying to punish him. I just needed the truth labeled properly for once. Another wave of exhaustion rolled through me, not from pain, but from clarity. I wasn't the daughter they loved differently. I was the placeholder, the one who filled the gaps when the other one cracked. I reached for my phone again and opened a new email. To Delora Kane, subject, need to talk. Body, hi Delora, I hope you're well. I'm in the hospital right now, but I've come across some things I think we need to discuss. Urgently. I hovered over the send button, then tapped it without flinching. It wasn't about revenge, it was about self-respect. And for the first time in my life, I was going to make them look me in the eye, or at least into a courtroom. I stood inside my bedroom for a full minute after locking the door. My hand was still wrapped around the knob, but I didn't move. I just let the weight of it all settle in my shoulders, in my back, in that part of me that always stood up straighter than it needed to, just to keep peace. I wasn't doing that anymore. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing relentlessly on the nightstand. Dozens of texts, family thread, Mom's number, a few from Isolde, even Thorn, which was rare enough to make me pause. I didn't need to open them to know what they were about. Sunday, the family brunch, they were still planning to host it here, in my apartment, as if the past 2 weeks hadn't happened. As if I hadn't been in a hospital bed begging for breath while they comforted my sister over a breakup. As if the lawsuit I'd hinted at in my email to Delora hadn't even landed in their inbox. The first message I actually opened read, "Still okay to do Sunday. Everything's in motion. Food is confirmed. Mom said we're using your kitchen like last time." Then another, "Don't forget to confirm the food delivery. They need a credit card on file." Not one. "How are you feeling?" Not even a, "Glad you're home safe." I didn't reply. I got up, pulled on a soft sweater, and sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the stack of mail I'd been ignoring. Most of it was junk, a few hospital bills I didn't have the energy to open yet. My legs still throbbed when I stood too long, but I'd been managing. It was what I did best. That Sunday came quicker than I wanted it to. By noon, the apartment was filled with the familiar hum of voices and the clinking of ceramic dishes. The catering company had arrived without a hitch, no thanks to me. Isolde must have coordinated it. People floated in and out of the living room, balancing champagne flutes and small talk. Laughter bubbled from the kitchen. I watched it all from the hallway, leaning slightly against the doorframe, bracing my body, but also my nerves. The invitation had said, "Hosted by the Nylons," which was technically true. Except it was my lease on the wall, my name on the utility bills, my Wi-Fi keeping their social media scrolling. No one seemed to notice. A couple from Mom's church came up and said, "Vera, this is such a lovely place. You've really made it your own." She smiled sweetly, resting a hand on her blouse like she'd picked the throw pillows herself. She didn't correct them. I cleared my throat, loud enough. They glanced at me, unsure. "Oh, and who are you?" the woman asked. "Are you helping with the event?" Before I could respond, Mom chimed in, still smiling. "This is Aelith. She's been a huge help. A help, a space, a resource, a rental without rent." I nodded, turned on my heel, and walked toward the kitchen without a word. My leg protested, but my temper outpaced the pain. I needed air. Or distance. Maybe both. The evening dragged. I kept to myself, refused to refill anyone's glass, didn't pretend to laugh at the right jokes. People started to notice, but no one said anything. Not out loud, anyway. Later, after most of the guests had gone and only family lingered, I was in the kitchen checking that nothing had been left burning in the oven. My mother came in, holding her iPad. "Do you have the final catering receipt?" she asked casually, like we hadn't stood in a hospital just days before and watched her leave without looking back. I wiped my hands, took the iPad, and tapped through the tabs. That's when it happened. The message blinked into view. She must have left her iMessages open. It was a thread between her and Thorn. "Vera, let's not involve her in the title stuff. She takes things too personally. Keep it clean. She's doing fine." Thorn. "Got it. She doesn't need to know. Easier this way." My heart didn't pound. It slowed. The screen felt like fire in my hands. I locked the tablet, walked into the living room where both of them were stacking dessert plates, and held it out to her with both hands. "I saw your message," I said calmly. Vera froze mid-reach. Thorn glanced up, then quickly back down. "You're not going to erase me and call it efficiency," I added, my voice even, precise. She blinked, lips parting like she wanted to apologize, or pretend not to know what I was talking about. Instead, she said, "Aelith, this isn't the time." I smiled. "Just once, just enough." It never is, right? Not when I was 10 and Isolde cried over my birthday. Not at graduation when you left because she had a panic attack over a B-. Not when I was bleeding in an ER and you were soothing her over a breakup. It's never the time. Thorn cleared his throat. "Let's not do this right now." But I was already done with patience. "Next time you host anything here without putting my name on it," I said clearly, "you'll be renting this place." At market rate. I left them standing there. My hands didn't shake. I didn't go far, just to my bedroom. But the act of walking away while they stood in my space felt like reclaiming something that had been slowly drained out of me over years. Once inside, I turned the lock, not for safety, not for silence, but because I was drawing a line, one they'd finally see. I stared at the screen for a long while after that notification popped up. "You've been removed from the group." Just like that. No warning, no explanation. 1 second, I was part of the thread, silent but present. The next, gone. Like I never belonged in the first place. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. A door didn't just close, it slammed. I let the phone slip from my hand onto the couch cushion, leaned back, and closed my eyes. My mind wasn't spinning. Not anymore. It had been slow brewing something else. A clarity I hadn't felt in years. There was nothing left to salvage. No more space for hope that they'd realize what they were doing and come running back. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision, a pattern, a truth. So I made one of my own. 2 days later, I got dressed for the first time in something other than sweatpants and a hoodie. My legs still ached if I stood too long, but I moved slowly, deliberately. No more pacing like I was waiting for something to change. I had somewhere to go, and I was walking in there not as the forgotten daughter, but as the woman they underestimated. Delora Kane's office was tucked in a 2-story brick building on the east side, across from a coffee shop I used to frequent before things spiraled. Her receptionist smiled when I walked in. A real one, not that tight, brittle thing people offer when they pity you. Delora met me at the door of her office, blazer sharp, presence calm. We didn't do small talk. She gestured for me to sit and said, "I got your email. Let's talk." And so I did. I laid it all out, the will I was quietly erased from, the brunch where my name was left off everything, the messages I wasn't supposed to see. Her expression never wavered. She just listened, taking notes occasionally, nodding as I explained how Isolda's grant proposal, the one they'd all been praising on social media, was something I had written, word for word. When I was finished, Delora looked at me with something I hadn't seen in a long time: belief. She didn't question if I was being dramatic. She didn't suggest I let it go for family's sake. She just said, "This isn't just disrespect. This is a pattern of coercion and misuse, and you've documented most of it, which is good." She drafted the paperwork right there. First, the revocation of all financial authorizations and emergency access I'd granted over the years. Then a formal review of property documents tied to the family trust. Finally, a preliminary letter to Isolda and Vera outlining intent to investigate fraud if there were further misuses of my work or identity. I signed with a steady hand. When I got home that afternoon, the sky was darkening with early spring clouds. I made myself tea. Chamomile, the only thing in my cabinet that didn't have some memory attached to it. I sank into the armchair by the window, phone in hand, not expecting anything. But still, habit made me check. I didn't expect the headline in my email from the nonprofit's newsletter. Featured artist, Isolda Nyland shares her journey to healing through art and resilience. The photo was one of her smiling in her studio, the one I helped her rent. The first quote, "Writing that grant myself gave me the confidence to try again." The grant she wrote was mine. Every sentence, every calculation, every word. And there it was, in print, published and emailed to hundreds of donors and professionals, with no mention of me. Again. But this time, it wasn't just a family slight. It was theft, public, professional, intentional. I read the article twice, then I closed the tab. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't throw my mug across the room. Instead, I opened our shared family drive, located the folder labeled Grant Docs, Isolda, and deleted it without hesitation. Then, I blocked Isolda's number and email. Not a pause, not a pang. I forwarded the article to Delora with a single line in the subject. They took my name. Now I take it back. No one had the right to my voice anymore, not when they only cared for it when it served them. After that, I went to the group chat, the one I'd been removed from, and opened a new thread with only 3 recipients: Vera, Thorn, and Isolda. I typed, "Plagiarism is a form of fraud. This is your one and only warning. If I see my work or identity used again without my consent, I will escalate legally." Then I hit send. No emojis, no sign-offs. No hope you're well. Within minutes, Vera removed herself from the thread. Isolda never responded. Thorn's red receipt lingered the longest before disappearing. I didn't need them to say anything. Their silence was already loud enough. I stood and walked to the kitchen, poured the rest of my tea down the sink. The air outside had turned damp, and I could hear the soft tap of rain beginning against the windows. Something in me knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. They weren't used to being held accountable. But this time, I wasn't going to roll over and cushion the blow. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, they'd have to do it without my money, my words, or my silence. That was the line I finally drew. And they'd just stepped over it. The front door shut behind me with a softness that betrayed how hard my jaw was clenched. I didn't respond to Isolda's voice, that final shriek that always came when things didn't go her way. "You'll regret this," she had snapped like a spoiled child with her hand caught in the cookie jar. Maybe once upon a time I would have flinched. Not anymore. I didn't regret walking out. I regretted ever walking in. It was Vera's idea. Of course it was. "A family talk," she'd said in her email. "Nothing dramatic, just a chance to clear the air." That's how she put it, as if the air hadn't been thick with avoidance for years, as if the real drama hadn't already played out the night they chose silence over my safety. Still, I showed up, because I needed to. Not for closure, not for peace, but because if they were going to sit me down and play pretend, I was going to make sure they heard me for the first time in their lives, even if I had to blast the truth through the stained glass windows of their comfortable little lies. The house looked exactly the same: white shutters, trimmed hedges. The scent of citrus-scented furniture polish hit me the moment I stepped inside. My mother's way of disinfecting discomfort. And there they were, seated in a tidy circle in the living room like a church counseling group. Vera with her peppermint tea, Thorn with his ever-present newspaper folded neatly in his lap. Isolde, legs crossed tightly, sipping from a mug she hadn't earned. "Thanks for coming," Vera said, her voice all sugar and sharp corners. "We were hoping to have a calm, loving conversation." I didn't sit right away. I stood near the entry, scanning the arrangement like I was walking into a deposition, not a gathering of kin. "You've been distant," Vera continued, setting her mug down on the coaster. "Your tone has been strained, and we think it's time we address what's been happening." "You've changed," Isolde added. Her voice was soft, but the insult was jagged. "You used to be so helpful, so steady. Now it's like you're angry all the time." I said nothing. They didn't notice the recorder in my pocket. They didn't notice that I hadn't taken off my coat. They didn't notice because they never did. That's the whole problem. I finally moved, slowly, deliberately, and sat down in the empty chair they'd so kindly left for me, the only one without a cushion. "You gathered a room to discuss my tone," I said evenly, but never once checked if I was breathing after the accident. Thorn shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. "I was in an emergency room," I continued, "with a broken leg and cracked ribs. And I called you. Do you remember what you said, Mom?" Vera tilted her head like she always did when she was ready to deny something. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket and tapped a button. The room filled with static. And then my own broken voice played through the speaker. "Please, I can't breathe." And then her reply, unmistakable. "Are you really dying? Isolde just had a complete meltdown. She's spiraling, honey. We need to keep her grounded." The audio ended. Nobody moved. Vera's hands wrapped tight around her teacup. Isolde's expression tightened into something between rage and humiliation. "Would you like me to play it again?" I asked. Vera opened her mouth, to argue, maybe to deny, but I cut her off by opening the small black notebook in my lap. I'd brought it not for theatrics, but for accuracy. Dates, amounts, and receipts. I had written them all down. October 2018, $600. Paid Isolde's car insurance so it wouldn't get repossessed. January 2019, $1,250. Covered Mom's dental procedure when Dad said your insurance had lapsed. May 2020, $900. Helped Isolde move into the artist loft in Portland. I turned the page. March 2021, $2,000. Submitted the grant application Isolde claimed to write, the one that paid for her mental health through sculpture project. Isolde flushed. "You offered—" "No," I said calmly. "I was manipulated. I met my mother's gaze. You didn't raise me. You extracted from me. And when I was no longer useful, you erased me, efficiently." Vera set her teacup down, slow and careful. "We never intended to hurt you, Aelith, but families are complicated. Everyone gives in different ways." "No," I interrupted. "You don't get to intellectualize what you did. You made me the donor, the fixer, the silent partner in a family that only values breakdowns. It can be seen fixing." Thorn finally spoke. "You're blowing this out of proportion. You were never asked to give anything." I turned to him, eyes steady. "You're right. I was never asked. I was expected." Then I stood. "This," I said, gesturing around the room, "was your last chance to see me as a daughter. From here on out, I'm your legal opponent. I'm done negotiating for dignity." I turned, coat swishing at my sides, and walked out. No one followed. But just as I reached the door, Isolde's voice rang out. "You'll regret this." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. By the time I placed my mug down beside the sink, the heat from the tea had already left my palms. The kitchen was still, Outside, traffic passed in quiet waves, Portland's hum never far. But inside my apartment, the stillness had changed. It wasn't the kind of quiet that comes from being alone. It was the kind you get when you've stopped chasing noise, when you've chosen to listen only to your own breath. Delora had just left, her bag slung over one shoulder, her voice low and certain. "I'll file everything first thing tomorrow," she'd said. "And Aelith, we found something else." She didn't elaborate then. She wanted me to see it myself. The next morning, she was back, this time with a file thicker than I expected and a tension in her expression I hadn't seen before. "I'm sorry to bring this in person," she said, placing the folder gently on my kitchen table, "but it's better that you know now than find out in court." I pulled it open, scanned the top page. My own name, Aelith Danvers, listed as a co-signer on 2 credit lines I'd never applied for. One linked to a business grant Isolde had received, another tied to a student loan consolidation from 4 years ago. My breath caught. "I know," Delora said, gently interrupting. "We had a forensic accountant go through their records after the grant article surfaced. Your social security number was used." Not once, multiple times. She let me flip through the pages. Account numbers, transaction dates, my digital signature pasted into a mortgage application from a property I'd never heard of. "It gets worse," she said. "They used your credit standing to secure tax benefits, backdated filings, and property title edits." My chest felt tight, not with shock. That was long gone, but with a simmering heat I'd never known I could carry for this long. "They buried me," I whispered, not to Delora, but to the room. "No," she said, her voice level. "They tried to. You're the one standing." We filed 3 separate motions that afternoon: financial restitution, legal fraud, and property misrepresentation. She sent out notices to their attorney of record. Apparently, they'd retained someone after the family brunch fell apart. Vera attempted to delay the process, filing for continuance twice. Both were denied. And 2 weeks later, we were in court. Multnomah County Courthouse was colder than I remembered, though maybe that was just me. I sat in the plaintiff's chair, hands clasped together. I didn't dress for war. I wore navy slacks, a soft sweater, and the same boots I'd bought on clearance 2 winters ago. I didn't need to look strong. I just needed to sit in the truth. Vera arrived first. Her hair curled perfectly at the ends, that same beige coat she always wore when she wanted to appear unbothered. Thorne walked behind her, eyes downcast. Isolde came last, face pale, lips pressed together like she was bracing for impact. They didn't look at me. Not once. Delora stood when called and began her presentation with calm precision. "Your Honor, this is not simply a matter of emotional damage. What we are showing today is a long-term, calculated misuse of identity and assets, involving forged documentation, unauthorized credit access, and the stripping of property rights from my client, Ms. Aelith Danvers." She clicked the remote in her hand. Slide after slide filled the courtroom screen, PDFs of my falsified signature, emails forwarding my personal documents to grant administrators, account access logs showing Vera logging in under my name. I didn't flinch. I didn't look at them. I looked straight ahead, at the judge, and then at the screen, like I was watching someone else's story unfold. A woman I pitied. A woman I finally believed deserved better. Vera tried to speak, twice. Her lawyer whispered something that made her sit down. Isolde shifted uncomfortably, her leg bouncing. Thorne remained still. When Delora finished, the courtroom fell quiet for a moment. Then the judge spoke. His voice was firm. "The evidence is comprehensive and troubling. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Ms. Danvers." I breathed slowly, waiting. "In accordance with Oregon law, the title to the Lake Oswego property will revert fully to Ms. Danvers. The defendants will have 30 days to vacate. A civil fine of $85,000 is imposed for damages, legal fees, and restitution. A restraining order will also be issued prohibiting any future use of Ms. Danvers' identity in legal, public, or financial records." Vera gasped softly. Isolde whispered something I didn't catch. Thorne finally lifted his gaze. but not to me. He stared at the judge, as if shocked the world would no longer bend to him. The gavel struck once. Court adjourned. I stood slowly, knees tight but steady. I didn't look back at the people I used to call my family. They weren't mine anymore. Outside the courthouse, the sky had turned the soft gray of late afternoon. The news hit social media before we even reached the parking garage. An anonymous source, not me, but someone in that courtroom, leaked the full records. By the time I got home, a local news headline was already circulating online. Respected family found liable for fraud against their own daughter. I didn't correct it. I didn't repost it either. I simply made tea, sat by the window, and let the quiet come. Delora called that evening. "It's not over for them," she said. "They'll push back. Maybe not legally, but in other ways. You ready?" I sipped from the mug, the chamomile warming my chest. Let them implode. They've built this mess on lies. I just stopped cleaning up after them. She laughed softly. "You're not the woman who walked into my office 6 weeks ago." "No," I agreed. "I'm the one they thought would never fight back." And now? They'd have to learn what it meant to lose the person they always assumed would stay silent, even as the words left my mouth. Now we wait for them to implode. I didn't mean them with venom. I meant them like a prediction, a forecast, not a curse. Because when people like Vera and Thorne lose control, they don't burn quietly, they unravel, publicly, destructively, and messily. All I had to do was sit still. A week passed after the verdict, long enough for the story to circulate. I heard from a former colleague, a grant committee member, and an old friend from undergrad, all reaching out in ways that felt less like gossip and more like quiet recognition. Not one of them asked for details. They just said some version of, "I always wondered if something was off." It rained the day the knock came, the kind of Portland rain that wasn't dramatic, just insistent, tapping against the windows like a steady reminder that time was passing. I had just pulled a sweater over my shoulders when I heard it. 3 soft knocks. No buzz. No text. Just that sound you can feel in your chest when it means something. I stood still for a moment, heart steady, legs firm. Then I walked to the door, checked the peephole, and there she was. Isolde. Hair soaked, makeup running, phone clutched in one hand like it was the last thing tethering her to the world. She wasn't dressed for drama, not her usual curated self, just a hoodie, leggings, and desperation. I didn't open the door, I just watched. She knocked again, a little louder this time. "Aelith," she said, her voice cracking. "Please, I need to talk." Still, I stood there, unmoved. "I didn't know Dad used your name," she continued. "I swear, I didn't know until last week. I wouldn't have. I didn't ask him to." Her voice broke, and for a moment, I closed my eyes. Not from pain, from the kind of mental exhaustion that sets in when you've heard this kind of plea before. Not exactly the same words, but the same pattern, excuse wrapped in apology, guilt smothered in blame. "I just needed help," she went on. "You've always had everything figured out. You don't spiral like I do. It's easier for you, right?" I didn't laugh, but I did smile, not out of humor, but out of clarity. Inside, I could feel the ghost of myself who used to melt at that tone. The version of me that would have opened the door and said, "It's okay." I get it. The girl who believed keeping the peace was love. That version had been buried under paperwork, court records, and the quiet power of being believed. I turned away from the door. I made tea. The rain hadn't let up, and I didn't check again. I didn't need to. I knew she was still out there. An hour later, the phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. Then I saw the name flash on the screen. Ewan. I paused. We hadn't spoken since he left. Since he said he wasn't ready for someone so self-sufficient. Since he called me resilient like it was a curse word. I answered. His voice was hesitant. "I saw the article." Of course he had. "I guess," he started, then tried again. "I guess I always knew you deserved better, but I never knew you were bleeding that long." I didn't say anything right away. Then I replied calmly, "Yeah, I was." He was quiet for a beat. "I'm sorry." "I'm not." I said. We hung up without saying goodbye, and for once, that felt right. The rain thickened. The clock ticked past 8. I moved from the kitchen back to the couch, sat with my tea, and listened. Not to the world outside, but to the sound of someone sitting on the floor outside my door, the occasional sniffle, the tap of a phone against skin. Then her voice, small. Please, don't make me go back there. I stared into my mug. The tea had gone lukewarm, but I didn't care. She could have come clean 100 times. She could have said something, anything, before I needed lawyers. But she didn't. And now that the mask had fallen and there was no audience left, she wanted grace. Grace I used to hand out like party favors. But tonight, I didn't open the door. I didn't even stand. Instead, I reached for my phone, opened a new message, and typed, I needed you once. You hung up. Now you need me. I stayed quiet. That's the difference between us. I stared at the words. Then I hit delete. Not because they weren't true, but because they didn't need to be sent. Not everything had to end in punctuation. Some truths don't need delivery to be real. I leaned back against the couch cushion, the sound of rain softening around me, and let my chest rise and fall without effort. For the first time in my life, silence wasn't something to fear. It was something I'd earned. The sky outside my apartment was a dull shade of gray, the kind that made even early spring feel like a tired sigh. I had just put away the last of the clean dishes when I noticed the envelope on the floor. Slipped through the doormail slot, its edges slightly damp from the morning drizzle. There was no return address, no typed label, just my name, handwritten in delicate cursive that instantly sent me back 20 years. Meryl Quinn, my 5th-grade teacher. I sat down on the couch, legs crossed, careful with my knee, and opened the letter. Aelith, you were quiet. Too quiet. And back then, I thought that meant you were okay. I was wrong. I see that now. I saw the news, not the details, just the headlines. It made me think of you, and I needed you to hear this. You mattered. Even then, I just didn't know how to show it. With regret and warmth, Meryl Quinn. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, not because I was overwhelmed, but because part of me had given up on ever hearing that kind of acknowledgement from anyone who knew me back then. Not a family member, not a teacher, not even a neighbor. I folded the letter and placed it back into the envelope with more care than it probably deserved. Not because it undid anything, but because it was the first apology I hadn't had to ask for. Later that afternoon, I walked 3 blocks down to the edge of my old neighborhood. There was a new mural painted across the elementary school's brick wall now, filled with birds and stars and words like belonging and growth. I stood across the street from the school gate, hands in my pockets, and stared for a few long minutes. I didn't cross, didn't need to. The library was still where it always had been, the second room on the left from the entrance. I remembered sitting in the far corner during recess, pretending to be absorbed in books I'd already read twice, just to avoid the embarrassment of not being picked for a game or noticed on the field. Some kids got lost in stories because they loved adventure. I did it because the silence in fiction felt kinder than the silence of being ignored. By early evening, I was back in my apartment, slicing lemons in the kitchen as rice simmered on the stove. I was expecting a few people, not a party, just a quiet dinner, the kind of gathering you host not out of obligation, but because you genuinely want to break bread with people who have, in their own quiet ways, stood beside you when you didn't even know you were falling. Delora arrived first, punctual as always. She brought a bottle of wine and a pie from a bakery she swore by. Then came Nate from my office, the only one who visited me in the hospital and didn't once ask for an update on the project we'd been working on, Mrs. Carver from across the hall knocked gently. I made my famous deviled eggs, she said with a wink. Hope they still count as famous after all these years. And then, to my surprise, Meryl. She stood at the threshold for a second longer than necessary, her coat still damp, hair grayer than I remembered. Is this okay? She asked quietly. It is, I said, and stepped aside to let her in. We ate around the small dining table I'd inherited from a Craigslist stranger. The plates didn't match. The napkins were paper, but the warmth? That was real. That was mine. No speeches, no toasts, just stories, a few laughs, and the soft comfort of unforced company. At one point, someone said, "You look lighter." And I smiled, not politely, not for show, but with the ease of someone no longer trying to earn her place at the table. "I finally stopped waiting to be seen," I said simply. That night, after everyone had gone and the dishes were stacked, I sat by the window with a mug of tea. Outside, the street was quiet, the usual mix of porch lights, distant barking, the occasional car rolling by. My phone buzzed once. It was from Vera. "Your father isn't doing well. He'd like to see you." No guilt-laced paragraphs, no manipulation, just a fact. I didn't delete the message. I didn't respond either. I placed the phone face down and turned my gaze back to the street, back to the life I was building one breath at a time. My legs still hurt when the weather turned, a reminder of the crash, of what was broken and pieced back together. But the ache in my chest? That was different now. It was duller, less urgent. The wound was there, yes, but it wasn't leaking anymore. It wasn't consuming me. Forgiveness isn't something you owe, and peace doesn't require permission. I took a deep breath, not for dramatic effect, but because I could. I wasn't healed. But I was whole, and that was enough. Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. And sometimes, the most powerful act of love is choosing yourself when no one else will. What would you have done if your family left you behind, again and again? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more true, raw, and unforgettable revenge stories that hit where it hurts. Hello. My name is Mila. I was always the quiet one in my family, the one they never took seriously. Until one evening, I heard my sister laugh. "She's so dumb. I took her money. She doesn't even know." And my mother? She didn't stop her. She encouraged her. That night, I didn't cry. I hit record. I asked about the missing fund at dinner, and my sister's hand trembled around her wine glass. They thought I'd stay silent forever. But what happens when the quiet one fights back? Have you ever realized too late that the people draining you share your last name? It was supposed to be a quick stop, 10 minutes at most. I had one last folder to drop off at Mom's house, part of the final paperwork for Dad's estate. The sun had just started to dip below the trees, and the air outside still held that lingering Texas spring warmth. I didn't even bother to text ahead. We were family. You don't need an invitation to your mother's house. At least, that's what I used to believe. I parked in front of the brick house I'd grown up in, windows glowing, porch light already on. The old azaleas in the front yard were in full bloom, just like every March. I stepped up onto the porch, papers clutched in my arm, and turned the knob slowly. The door was unlocked. From the foyer, I could hear voices coming from the kitchen. Familiar voices. Mom's and my sister's. I was about to call out, let them know I was home, when Seraphine's voice sliced through the quiet like a razor. "She's so dumb," she said, her tone sharp and disgusted. "I took her money. She doesn't even know." I froze. The hallway suddenly felt too narrow, the walls pressing in. My hand instinctively pulled back from the edge of the doorway. My breath caught in my throat, chest tightening, but my feet stayed rooted. Then came Mom's voice, calm, matter-of-fact. "Keep draining her. She's too soft to fight back." I stopped breathing. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. That my brain had twisted the sounds, played a trick on me. But no, they said what they said, and they meant it. I leaned back against the wall, eyes wide, heart hammering. A hot wave of something, I couldn't tell if it was rage or grief, washed over me. I felt it rise to my chest, burning and freezing all at once. I couldn't move. I couldn't make sense of what I'd heard. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't one offhand comment taken out of context. This was a plan, a tactic, a shared understanding between my mother and my sister. And I was the target. I heard Seraphine laugh. "She's practically begging to be taken advantage of. She hands over money like it's Halloween candy." Mom chuckled lightly. "That's why we don't say anything. She wants to feel useful. Let her." My stomach twisted. My hand, still holding the paperwork, began to shake. Pages fluttered under my arm. My fingers went numb. Flashes of memory rushed in, helping Seraphine pay her student loans, co-signing on her first car when Dad said no, giving her access to some of Dad's accounts, just in case. Every time, I'd thought I was doing the right thing. That family came first, that helping each other was what we did. I thought I was loved, respected even. But what I heard in that kitchen was something else entirely. I wasn't loved. I was convenient. I stepped back into the hallway. My phone was in my back pocket. I pulled it out slowly, heart still pounding in my ears. My thumb hovered over the record button. I hesitated. For half a second. This felt wrong, invasive. But then I remembered her voice. She's so dumb. I pressed record. No more giving them the benefit of the doubt. No more letting things slide. I held the phone low, careful not to make a sound. Seraphine kept talking, gloating about how she'd shifted some assets and opened a joint account just in case. Mom nodded along, murmuring her approval. My face burned, but I didn't move. When the conversation finally drifted into mundane things, grocery lists, some friend's retirement party, I stepped back. Quietly, I slipped out the door. The screen door creaked slightly, and I winced, but no one followed. Back in my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment. I didn't start the engine. I didn't even buckle my seatbelt. I just stared straight ahead, breathing hard. That house, the one behind me. It was no longer a place of comfort. It was where betrayal lived. Finally, I turned the key. The engine purred to life. I pulled out slowly, driving aimlessly down quiet streets, streetlights flickering on one by one as dusk deepened into night. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. Tears blurred my vision as I passed neighborhoods I'd known my whole life. The ice cream shop we used to go to after Sunday church. The corner gas station where Seraphine taught me to drive. Every landmark felt tainted now. When I finally pulled into my apartment parking lot, the sky had gone black. I climbed out, legs heavy, and trudged up the stairs to my unit. Inside, I dropped the file folder on the counter. I didn't even bother to turn on the main lights. I moved through the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stood by the sink, letting the coolness of the glass ground me. I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered again, this time over the playback button, and I listened. Their voices filled the room, cold and clear. She's so dumb. I took her money. Keep draining her. Each word landed like a punch, but strangely, the more I listened, the less power they seemed to hold. Something inside me had shifted. I wasn't going to cry. Not now. They called me soft. Maybe I was. But soft doesn't mean stupid. And stupid is letting them get away with this. I walked to my bedroom, sat at the edge of my bed, and replayed the recording one more time. Then I opened my laptop and started a folder labeled Proof. I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, but I knew one thing. This time, I wouldn't let it slide. I stared out the window, watching the wind rustle through the trees. My face was still, but inside, a storm had started. They thought I was soft. Then they'd never heard me silent, with a plan. I didn't sleep, not even a little. After replaying that recording a dozen times, I sat on the floor with my laptop open and every financial document I could get my hands on. Bank statements, wire transfers, estate disbursements, trust account summaries, all of it. Line by line, I traced the movement of money, dates, amounts, signatures. Some transactions looked familiar, small ones, things I knew about, but others, payments I never authorized, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. An $18,000 consulting fee to a holding company I'd never heard of. All conveniently timed weeks after my father passed, when Valora pushed me to let Seraphine help with the heavy lifting. By sunrise, I wasn't angry anymore, just focused, coldly, precisely focused. That same morning, I texted Seraphine and Valora. Dinner tonight. My treat. Just us. Haven't caught up in a while. Seraphine replied first. Of course. So proud of you for reaching out. Valora sent a thumbs up emoji. That alone made my jaw clench. By early evening, I'd already picked the place. A chic restaurant downtown they both liked, white tablecloths, exposed brick walls, and waiters who called everyone ma'am or sir, no matter how young you looked. A spot that matched Seraphine's version of herself. Classy, unbothered, elevated. I arrived 5 minutes early and asked for a booth in the corner. Somewhere I could see them clearly. Somewhere private enough for what was about to happen. They walked in together. Seraphine wore a pale pink blazer and heels too high for a weekday. Valora had on pearls, her hair stiff with hairspray, her eyes already scanning the room for familiar faces. I stood to greet them, hugged each one politely, then slid back into my seat like this was just another Tuesday. For the first few minutes, it was small talk, work, neighborhood gossip, a bit of fake laughter from Seraphine when I mentioned I'd been going through some of Dad's files. "Oh, I forgot how meticulous he was," I said, sipping my water. "Even his sticky notes were dated." Valora nodded, smiling. "Your father always did like order. I suppose it skipped a generation, though." I smiled back. "I don't know. I guess it depends on what kind of order we're talking about." Seraphine placed her napkin delicately on her lap and looked around. "This place is cute. You really are growing up, Mila." There it was, that tone, the one where every compliment came wrapped in condescension, like I was the family intern just lucky to be invited to the meeting. We placed our orders. Valora got the halibut. Seraphine, a kale salad with grilled chicken. I barely looked at the menu, ordered soup and a side of patience. When the server stepped away, I leaned slightly forward, resting my hands on the edge of the table. "So, I've been reviewing the Morningside Fund," I said, casual, even. "The one I transferred to after Dad's will was executed?" Seraphine's smile tightened. Valora reached for her wine. "It hasn't posted any returns," I continued, eyes on Seraphine. "I just wanted to check. Did it roll over somewhere else?" For a beat, no one spoke. Then Seraphine gave a short, airy laugh. "Oh, yeah, that. I think it was delayed. You know how those things go. Market fluctuations, holding periods, whatever." She waved her hand as if brushing away a fly. Valora jumped in. "Mila, really, it's a small amount. Why stress about it?" I tilted my head, smiled faintly. "Because Dad stressed about every dollar. Remember?" Silence. Seraphine's fingers wrapped tighter around her wine glass. I watched closely as the stem tilted just slightly. A tremble, barely visible. But it was there. I said nothing more. Just let the silence breathe. The server returned with our food. The moment passed, but not for me. I caught the glance Seraphine threw at Valora. A quiet signal. One I'd seen before, usually when I was being dismissed from a conversation that wasn't for me. We ate. They moved the conversation forward, tried to, at least. Talked about a charity gala next weekend some influencer Seraphine was partnering with. Valora complained about HOA politics again. I smiled and nodded, let them fill the space with noise. But under the table, my hand hovered near my purse. Inside was a slim flash drive holding the recording. I wasn't going to pull it out, not yet. This wasn't the time, not in public, but I wanted them to know I knew, to feel that shift. Seraphine was slipping. She had no idea how obvious she was. And Valora? She had always been skilled at avoiding direct confrontation. She preferred guilt, quiet pressure. Her game was to smother you in obligation. But I was done playing. Halfway through dessert, none of us really eating, I asked one more question. "By the way," I said lightly, "how's that consulting group you set up last year, Seraphine? The one you said I'd be a silent partner in?" Seraphine's fork paused midair. "Oh, I didn't move forward with that," she said quickly. "The market wasn't right." I nodded slowly. "That's interesting. I saw my name on some of the filings." She blinked. "What?" "Just something I found while organizing Dad's estate files. Might be old drafts. I'll send them over. Maybe you can help me understand." Her mouth opened, then closed. Valora leaned in, voice tight. "Mila, enough. Why are you doing this?" I turned to her, still smiling. "Doing what, Mom?" "You know what I mean. Stirring things up. This is not the time or the place." I picked up my spoon, stirred my tea slowly. "I didn't stir anything. I asked about a fund, and a business I may or may not be tied to, that's all. More silence. I looked between them, calm, composed, and saw it clear as day. They weren't angry because I was wrong. They were rattled because I was right, and afraid. They'd underestimated me for so long. They forgot I was watching, listening, documenting. I didn't need to raise my voice or point fingers. All I needed was their reaction. Seraphine paid the bill with a smile too wide for her face. Valora mumbled something about being tired. We exchanged hugs, fake as ever, and parted ways at the valet. In my car, I sat for a few seconds before pulling out the flash drive and placing it on the console. I wasn't going to use it yet, but I had it, and now I'd seen them squirm. By the time I got home, the city had long quieted. Streetlights flickered against the windshield as I pulled into my spot and cut the engine. My hands lingered on the wheel, fingers stiff. I could still hear Seraphine's forced laugh, could still see the twitch in her wrist when I brought up that missing fund. The way Valora tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters. They weren't just lying, they were afraid I might finally stop playing dumb. I entered my apartment in silence, kicked off my shoes by the door, and tossed my keys on the entry table with a dull clatter. The lights stayed off. The only illumination came from the oven clock and the low hum of the fridge. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine, not because I wanted it, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The wine sat untouched on the counter while I leaned back against the sink, the cold granite pressing into my spine. My body felt exhausted, but my mind was far from done. I stared into the dark and let the quiet grow thick around me. And that's when the memories crept in. It always starts the same. One tiny detail unlocked from the back of my mind. This time, it was a memory from when I was 9. There was $20 missing from Mom's wallet. I remember sitting at the dining room table, legs swinging off the edge of the chair, Valora standing behind Mom, arms crossed. I didn't even know the money was gone until I heard Mom's voice, sharp and disappointed. "Mila, I'm not asking again. Did you take the money?" I shook my head, too scared to speak. Valora said nothing. She just stared at me with wide eyes and that quiet smirk. The one that said, "You're already losing." She never defended me. Not once. And Mom? She sighed, told me she was disappointed, and grounded me for a week. It wasn't until years later I learned Valora had used it to buy concert tickets with her friends. That memory spilled into another, then another. The summer I got accepted into a prestigious internship in Boston. I was so excited, I'd even started looking at sublets near campus. Then Valora claimed she needed to stay close to home that summer for mental health reasons. Mom asked if I could decline the offer so we could all be together. "You're the baby," she said. "You'll have more chances." I didn't argue. I never did. Back then, I thought being agreeable made me good, that sacrificing made me valuable. But now, sitting here with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking and my heart racing against my ribs, I saw it clearly. I wasn't their daughter or their sister. I was the buffer, the scapegoat. The one expected to nod and hand over her piece so the others could feel bigger. I stood up slowly, walked to my bedroom, and pulled open the drawer of my nightstand. A leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years waited quietly inside. I opened it, flipped past pages filled with half-thoughts, scribbled dreams, little bits of hope I'd tucked away. And then I picked up the pen. They raised me to accept less. I wrote it down like a headline. I don't anymore. My hand trembled, not from fear, but from something stronger, something steadier. I stared at those 2 sentences until they stopped looking like words and started feeling like decisions. I placed the journal back into the drawer and closed it gently. Then I walked to the shelf where old photo albums lived in dust and disuse. One thin frame stood out. Dad and me, standing by the garden, both wearing wide-brimmed straw hats. I must have been 7 or 8. He was showing me how to plant tomatoes. He used to say, "You see things the rest of us don't, Mila. That's your gift. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Back then, I thought he meant I had an imagination. Now I wondered if he was warning me. I held the photo against my chest and let myself sink into the couch. The quiet didn't feel suffocating anymore. It felt like armor. I whispered into the stillness. Maybe it's time I act like it. Outside, the wind moved the trees gently, tapping their branches against the windows in rhythmic thought. I watched shadows dance across the ceiling and let my mind settle into something firm. I got up again, moved to the small filing cabinet tucked in the corner near my desk. I hadn't opened that drawer since the funeral. Inside were all the estate documents, the legal filings, the trust breakdowns, some handwritten notes Dad left taped to folders, still in his blocky print. I knelt down, pulled the drawer open, and flipped through until I found the one I needed, marked in red pen, Personal Allocations. I carried it to the kitchen, cleared the counter with a quiet sweep of my arm, and spread everything out like a crime board. If they'd touched anything that was his, I'd know. I stayed up long past midnight, cross-referencing every file I had on the estate with the ones I'd pulled from Dad's old desk drawer. It wasn't just about being thorough anymore, it was about being certain. I needed proof, not paranoia. The morning after, I let myself sleep in a little. My body was tired, but my mind had already run several laps by the time I opened my eyes. Coffee in hand, I went over the last few documents again, highlighting discrepancies. One caught my eye, an unusually timed $25,000 transfer from an account tied to the estate. That particular account had been meant for long-term care services, no longer needed after Dad passed. I hadn't authorized anything to move from it. I dialed my personal banker at First Hill Bank, the one Dad had used for decades. It was a Friday morning, almost noon, and the hold time was surprisingly short. When he picked up, his tone was as polite as ever. "Good morning, this is Scott. How can I help you, Mila?" "Hi, Scott. I was reviewing the estate trust accounts. There's a recent $25,000 transaction I don't recognize. Can you check who authorized it?" "Let me pull that up," he said, typing. I walked into the living room, phone pressed between my shoulder and ear, flipping through the folder again. Scott cleared his throat on the other end. It was approved using a power of attorney credential, last year's version. "It's tied to your sister's authorization. You didn't confirm this?" "No, I didn't," I said sharply. "She's not authorized anymore. That POA was revoked when Dad passed." There was a pause. "It's odd, honestly. The system still accepted the code. We'll need to flag that and investigate internally." I thanked him, ended the call, and stood there for a long moment, heart heavy but mind completely clear. She was still moving money, behind my back, under my name, using power she was never supposed to have again. I took a breath. Then I picked up the keys. It was time to visit Valora. The drive over was quiet. My hands didn't shake this time. I wasn't walking into her house as her little girl. I wasn't looking for approval or softness. I was walking in as someone ready to confront the rot everyone had politely ignored for too long. Valora answered the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching through the blinds. She looked composed, hair neatly pinned back, lips painted in her usual mauve shade, a cardigan thrown over her blouse like she was hosting a garden club meeting. "Mila," she said with that manufactured warmth, "didn't expect to see you." "Can we talk?" I asked. She hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Of course." Inside, the house looked exactly the same. The scent of lemon polish, the porcelain plates on the wall, the slightly too loud ticking of the grandfather clock. I stood in the kitchen, laying the manila folder on the counter. "I found a problem," I said. "Seraphine's been moving money again, using old credentials. $25,000 went out last week." Valora didn't even blink. She poured herself a glass of iced tea like I'd just told her the forecast. "You're imagining things again," she said without looking up. "No, I'm not," I said. "The bank confirmed it. They're opening an investigation." Valora finally looked at me. Her expression was calm, too calm. "Mila, you've always had a tendency to spiral. You don't sleep, you overthink, and then you come up with these stories." My jaw tightened. "This isn't a story. This is a legal violation." She smiled faintly and offered me tea. "Sit. Have something to drink." "I'm not thirsty." "Well, I'm not doing this if you're going to come in here all accusatory," she said, finally showing irritation. Seraphine has always carried so much on her shoulders. She's trying to do her best. By draining Dad's accounts? Don't be dramatic, she snapped. It's not draining, it's adjusting. You're too emotional to understand how this works. My voice was calm, even when my hands weren't. You can keep trying to spin this, but the bank already flagged it. There's going to be an audit. She placed the glass down and crossed her arms. And what, Mila? You think this is going to end with you looking like the hero? You've always needed someone to blame when things didn't go your way. That's not what this is. She narrowed her eyes. No? Because it sounds a lot like you're playing victim again. You always do this. Something goes wrong, and suddenly it's the world against you. I stood still. I let her finish. Then I said, slowly, I'm not 9 years old anymore. I'm not going to sit here while you pretend this is about my feelings. She stared at me for a moment, then laughed quietly. There it is. The performance. You think being cold makes you strong? No. I think refusing to be lied to makes me sane. Silence settled between us like a weight. She picked up the folder, flipped it open briefly, and then closed it again like it offended her. You've changed, she said. I had to. I turned to leave. You walk out now, she called after me, and there's no coming back. I didn't even pause. Outside, the sun was high, but the breeze had picked up. It tugged at my sweater as I walked back to my car. I opened the door, got in, and stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror for a moment. I looked tired, not weak, just done. I took out my phone, scrolled to Maribel's contact, pressed call. Hey, she answered. You okay? No, I said. But I know what I'm doing now. I need a referral for a lawyer, the kind who deals with estate fraud. She didn't hesitate. Got it. I'll text you 2 names. Want me to sit in when you talk to them? No, I think I need to do this part alone. All right, I'm proud of you, Mila. I hung up and leaned back in the seat, letting the silence wrap around me again. This time, it wasn't the same silence from before, the one that held confusion and pain. This silence felt different. It felt like the breath before a storm. They wanted the old version of me, the quiet one, the one who nodded, who didn't ask questions, who handed over everything with a smile and got a pat on the head in return. But that Mila, she was gone. You wanted a quiet Mila, I whispered. Now you'll meet the version who reads every line. By Monday morning, I had already scheduled the meeting. A full week had passed since the confrontation at Mom's house. Since then, I'd spoken to an attorney, started documenting every unauthorized transaction, and compiled a folder of evidence that made even my lawyer raise an eyebrow. But I wasn't ready to go to court yet, not without one final card to play. So I invited Seraphine to lunch. She replied within minutes. Finally, her message read, glad to see you're ready to move on. She had no idea what she was walking into. The business club I chose was tucked into a quiet corner of downtown Austin. Seraphine used to brag about her membership there. Real leaders don't meet over brunch, she'd say. They make decisions over mahogany tables and crystal water glasses. So I picked a private conference room on the 2nd floor. Quiet, comfortable, respectable. She arrived 5 minutes late, on brand. Designer heels clicking against the hardwood, hair curled, makeup done just so. She looked the part, confident, in control, untouched by scandal. Mila, she said, air-kissing my cheek. You look rested. I smiled, gestured toward the chair across from me. Thanks for making time. She placed her purse on the table and glanced around. This is a nice spot. Good to see you trying to level up. I ignored the dig. Let's get started. I won't keep you long. From my folder, I pulled 2 sheets of paper and placed them gently on the table between us. One was Dad's original estate summary. The second, a copy of a signed contract Seraphine had used in a business pitch last quarter. My name was at the bottom. Her eyes barely flicked over the documents. What's this? Something I found while reviewing filings, I said evenly. This contract lists me as a partner in your project. I never signed it, never agreed to be part of it. She waved her hand, brushing it off like lint. Mila, please. It's standard language. You wouldn't understand the legal jargon. It doesn't mean anything. It does to the IRS and the Texas Business Registry. She blinked, then tilted her head and smiled. You're really going to nitpick this? After everything I've done for this family? You mean everything you've taken? She leaned back in her chair. Wow, so this is what this is. Some vendetta because Mom favors me. You're not mad about the contract, Mila. You're mad that I win. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small silver recorder, set it gently on the table. Her expression shifted just slightly, almost imperceptibly. I want to play you something, I said. Her lips parted, but I didn't wait for permission. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, sharp and unmistakable. She's so dumb. I took her money. She doesn't even know. There was no mistaking the tone, the arrogance, the cruelty. Seraphine's face drained of color. You recorded me? She asked, voice tight. Yes. That's illegal. Actually, I said, keeping my voice low and even, in Texas it's legal. One-party consent. I leaned in slightly. And I was the party. She opened her mouth again, then closed it. I let the silence hang between us for a beat longer before pressing stop. The room felt smaller now. She shifted in her chair, arms crossed tightly. You really think you're going to win this little war? She finally muttered. You've always been the fragile one. This doesn't suit you. I'm not here to win, I said. I'm here to end it. I pulled out one last envelope, an official legal notice. I slid it across the table toward her. Cease and desist, I said. Effective immediately. You will remove my name from any company documents, close any accounts tied to me, and halt all use of estate resources. If you don't, I file. Her hands trembled as she picked up the paper. This is insane. No, I said. This is overdue. Her expression contorted, trying to find the right tone, mockery, pity, anger. But none of them landed. She was cornered, and she knew it. I can't believe you do this to me, she said, voice cracking. I looked her straight in the eyes. You should have thought about that before you forged my name. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the wood. You're going to regret this. I didn't flinch. She gathered her things in a fury and stormed out without another word. I stayed seated, slowly exhaling the breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The room was quiet again. Peaceful, almost. I reached for the folder, slid the documents back into place, and closed it with care. My hand lingered over the recorder for a moment before I tucked it away. She had expected me to fold. Again. She had expected me to cry, to apologize, to ask her not to be mad, but I didn't. Not this time. As I walked out of the conference room and down the polished hallway, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt grounded, steady. At the elevator, I glanced at my reflection in the mirrored doors. There was no fear in my eyes, just clarity. I whispered to myself, they're used to me folding. Let's see how they handle fire. When I got back to my apartment that night, my phone buzzed before I even had time to take off my coat. A notification from my email, then another, then a third. I tossed my keys into the bowl on the entry table and slid my phone out of my pocket, scanning the subject lines. New comment on your mental health journey? Blog pingback. The truth about Mila. My stomach sank. I opened the email with shaking fingers. There it was. A brand new post on Seraphine's personal growth blog, one she hadn't updated in months. This new post, polished and full of syrupy language, detailed her experience navigating difficult family dynamics, referencing a loved one with a history of delusions and controlling behavior. She never used my name. She didn't need to. Every subtle jab, every veiled sentence painted me as unstable, overbearing, dangerous. And the comments? Dozens already. Supportive, fawning replies from her followers. You're so brave to share this. Family can be toxic. Protect your peace. Been there. Cutting ties was the best thing I ever did. I blinked slowly and locked my phone. I didn't feel anger, not in the way I used to. I felt something colder, sharper. I walked into the kitchen and poured a glass of water, the clink of ice against the glass grounding me. Then I picked up the folder I'd used in our last meeting. Time to take this further. My phone buzzed again, a text from my lawyer. Seraphine's public now. We move. Time to respond. I texted back, do it. The next morning, the real retaliation began, on my terms. First, I emailed a formal report to the board of directors of Seraphine's startup, attached copies of the contracts she'd signed using my name, along with time-stamped audio files from our meeting. I included a brief statement. I will be pursuing legal action for fraud and identity misuse. Second, I forwarded the same package to 2 tech journalists I'd worked with in the past, women I'd helped pro bono during their early freelance years. I knew they wouldn't run a hit piece, but they'd follow the money trail. Lastly, I posted nothing. Silence, for once, would speak louder. By early afternoon, I got a call from Maribel. She's scrambling, she said. One of her investors is asking questions, and guess who just reached out to me privately? Let me guess, I replied. Her assistant? Former assistant, she corrected. She quit last month and she's got receipts. We scheduled a meeting that same evening. Over coffee at a quiet corner cafe, the woman, Ari, shared a string of emails, Slack messages, and a document trail that revealed Seraphine had been using me as a shadow investor to appear more legitimate. She said it made the project feel safer, like it had family backing, Ari explained. I didn't know you weren't involved until the article started circulating. She used me, I said. She uses everyone, Ari said, sipping her drink. But she's sloppy when she thinks no one's watching. I thanked her and asked if she'd be willing to speak to my legal team. She agreed without hesitation. By the end of the week, the pressure had built to a breaking point. Seraphine was summoned to a formal mediation meeting at my lawyer's office. I arrived early, dressed simply but professionally, carrying nothing but my folder and resolve. She arrived 15 minutes late, wearing oversized sunglasses and tension like perfume. We sat across from each other in a glass-walled room, the mediator, a calm, gray-haired woman named Lisa, greeting us both with practiced neutrality. Let's begin. I didn't flinch. I opened my folder and placed 3 things on the table. 1. The original estate documentation listing my authority. 2. The fake contract bearing my forged signature. 3. The printed blog post Seraphine had written, complete with highlighted sentences that could be construed as libel. Seraphine didn't say a word. Then Lisa turned to me. Ms. Thorne, would you like to start? I met Seraphine's eyes. I stayed silent out of love. I didn't want this to be public. I didn't want to hurt you. But I'm not going to love you more than I respect myself. That ended when you started treating me like a pawn. Seraphine opened her mouth. Mila, this is being blown way out of proportion. Lisa held up a hand. Let her finish. I continued. You signed my name on contracts. You accessed restricted accounts. You used Dad's death to push your career forward and gaslight me when I asked questions. You always exaggerate things, she snapped. You've done that since we were kids. I turned to Lisa. This is why we're here. Seraphine's composure began to crumble. Her arms folded across her chest. Her leg bounced. Her voice rose. You're trying to ruin me. You always needed to be the victim, and now you're dragging me down just because you can't handle that I succeeded. I didn't respond. My attorney beside me stayed quiet, scribbling notes. Lisa looked at Seraphine. We can pause if you need a moment. No, Seraphine said, face flushed. She's making this a witch hunt. You did this, I said, my tone steady. Not me. Lisa looked between us. This will be documented. We'll proceed with a summary to both parties by next week. Seraphine stood abruptly. I'm done. I'm not listening to this crap. And she walked out, heels clicking violently against the tile. I remained in my chair, still holding the evidence. The mediator turned to me with a soft nod. We have more than enough, she said quietly. I didn't smile, didn't celebrate. I just gathered my papers, slid them back into the folder, and stood up. As I walked down the hall toward the elevators, I could still hear Seraphine's voice echoing from the front lobby. She was shouting at someone on her phone, pacing like a trapped animal. Let her unravel, let her shout, let her burn herself down. Because this time, I wasn't handing her the match. I closed the door to my apartment and set the folder on the kitchen counter, the weight of it landing with a soft thud that echoed louder than it should have. The next morning came quicker than expected. I didn't sleep much, just enough to function. Coffee was already brewing before the sun had risen above the Austin skyline. I sat on the edge of the couch with my mug in hand, not drinking, just staring at the muted TV. Then a soft ding from my phone snapped me out of the fog. It was an email from someone I hadn't heard from in nearly a year. Julia Palmer, a hiring manager for a regional finance firm I'd interviewed with last spring. Subject line, "For your eyes only." I tapped it open and the words stopped me cold. Mila, I feel I owe you an apology. After our interview last year, we received a phone call and later a letter, both from your sister. She expressed concern about your mental stability and strongly advised us not to move forward with you. At the time, we took it seriously, but I now believe it was meant to sabotage your chances. I'm deeply sorry. I put the phone down slowly, heart thudding, not from surprise, but confirmation. It had always lingered in the back of my mind. How that interview ended so abruptly. How the tone shifted halfway through. They'd told me I was overqualified, then said they needed someone less high maintenance. I had walked out confused, humiliated. Now I knew why. Seraphine had made sure to dim my light long before I started shining on my own. I pressed my palms against my thighs and closed my eyes. This wasn't just about Dad's money, or the contract, or even the forged signatures. This was about all the doors she'd quietly shut behind my back, the lies she told, the way she kept me tethered to the idea that I was too sensitive, too reactive, too emotional. I wasn't too anything. I just wasn't cruel, and that made me dangerous to someone who was. Later that afternoon, I met Maribel for a quiet lunch at a small diner on Burnett Road. It was one of those places with cracked leather booths and strong coffee that never tasted burned. She slid into the seat across from me, coat still buttoned, and studied my face. "You look sharp," she said, "like someone with a decision already made." "I got an email this morning," I said, passing her the phone. She read it quickly, her face tightening as she reached the end. "She called your future employer? She made sure I wouldn't get a future at all." Maribel sighed and folded her hands on the table. "You've given her every opportunity to step back quietly, to fix it. She burned every exit." "I'm done cleaning up her messes," I said, voice steady. "Now she'll answer for them." Maribel nodded. "We'll draft the paperwork today." And we did. That same evening, I walked into the Travis County Courthouse, file in hand, ready to file the civil lawsuit, identity theft, financial fraud, defamation. The clerk behind the glass didn't blink as I handed over the documents. She stamped them, slid them into the system, and gave me a copy. "Case number will be assigned by Monday," she said. "Thank you," I replied. Then I left. I didn't call anyone. I didn't text Seraphine. I didn't warn Valora. No more polite explanations. No more warnings. By the next day, the lawsuit had hit the public record, and by noon, it had hit the press. I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. Someone from Seraphine's investor circle must have flagged the filing. It spread like wildfire on local forums, then national blogs. And then, Seraphine started to post. First, it was subtle. "Some people will do anything for attention," she tweeted. Then a cryptic quote on Instagram. "The truth always comes out. So do the liars." Her comments were filled with sympathy. People who didn't know the truth, who believed in her polished image, her self-made narrative, her designer wardrobe and weekly affirmations. But the lawsuit didn't care how shiny her Instagram was. It only cared about facts. That weekend, I didn't leave my apartment. I organized every document, every communication, every screenshot into labeled folders. My lawyer called it overkill. I called it insurance. The following Monday, a reporter from the Chronicle reached out. "We're doing a piece on the lawsuit," she said. "Would you like to comment?" "No," I told her, "but I hope you get the story right." And then, Tuesday morning, I turned on the TV to find my sister's face on the screen. Not at a charity gala, not accepting another award. But under the headline, High-Profile Tech Executive Sued by Sister for Fraud, Defamation. I didn't smile. I didn't feel joy. I felt still. Because it wasn't revenge, it was release. I sat on the couch, watching them debate her guilt on morning talk shows, watching panelists guess what kind of sister would do such a thing. They didn't know. They didn't see the late nights of sabotage, the years of being erased with a smile. They didn't hear the conversations I'd recorded or see the way Valora looked through me instead of at me. But I saw something else. My reflection in the black screen, glassy and steady. You made me the villain, I whispered to myself. Now I'll be the storm. The courthouse stood still under a pale morning sky, its clean stone face catching the early light like it had nothing to hide. The sidewalks buzzed with quiet anticipation, reporters with notepads, camera crews unloading equipment, a few curious onlookers sipping coffee and pretending not to stare. Inside, it was colder. Not just the air conditioning, there was a chill in the way people avoided eye contact, the way even strangers seemed to sense something intimate was about to be laid bare in public. I walked through the security checkpoint with my shoulders back, wearing a navy blue dress, flats, and a quiet steadiness I hadn't felt in years. No jewelry, no makeup, just me, as I was, not as they painted me to be. As I entered the courtroom, I scanned the rows of benches. Seraphine was already there, seated beside a team of attorneys, her posture upright, but her face pale beneath the expertly applied foundation. Valora sat directly behind her, chin lifted, mouth pursed into a line that hadn't softened in decades. I noticed a few familiar faces from church, from community events, people who had watched my sister give speeches, shake hands, smile that politician's smile. They were here to witness a different kind of performance. I took my seat at the front beside my attorney. No words passed between us. We had rehearsed everything. Now it was just time to execute. The judge entered promptly at 9 a.m. A sharp rap of the gavel. Formalities. Then the proceedings began. My lawyer stood first, calm, professional, surgical. He presented the audio recording. Seraphine's voice, crystal clear. She's so dumb. I took her money. She doesn't even know. The courtroom didn't gasp. It went quiet. More quiet than a room full of people should be allowed to feel. One man in the back adjusted his tie. A woman 2 rows behind Valora crossed her arms slowly. Then came the paper trail. Bank transactions, forged documents, evidence of unauthorized access to trust accounts. Each piece handed respectfully to the judge, each one a brick in the foundation of truth. My attorney didn't dramatize. He didn't need to. The facts were brutal enough on their own. I glanced toward Seraphine only once. Her jaw was clenched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She wiped a single tear with a tissue she pulled from her sleeve, not a sob, just enough moisture to register as pain. But she didn't speak. She didn't apologize. Then, unexpectedly, Valora raised her hand. "I'd like to make a statement," she said. The judge looked down over his glasses. "You understand this will be under oath?" "I do." They swore her in. She stepped forward, adjusted the hem of her blazer, and turned slightly, half toward the judge, half toward the crowd. "She's always been the soft one," Valora began, nodding in my direction. "Mila was fragile as a child. She cried too easily, took things too personally. I didn't blink. We had to toughen her up somehow," she continued. "The world isn't kind to girls like that." She paused, glanced at Seraphine, then back at me. "I gave birth to her," she said. "I have the right to protect what's mine." There was a shift in the room. It wasn't dramatic. No one stood up and shouted. But the discomfort became physical. Shoulders shifted, legs uncrossed. A few heads turned toward me with new understanding. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to keep them from watering. A part of me had still hoped she would say something else, something human. But pride always came easier to Valora than compassion. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, walked to the front, and faced the judge. "This isn't about revenge," I said, my voice firm but low. "It's about reclaiming what was taken. My name, my dignity, my father's trust." I turned to Seraphine. You called me dumb. You stole from me. But the worst thing you did was assume I wouldn't survive it. She looked down at her hands. I looked back at the judge. I have nothing else to add. The judge nodded. This court will review all evidence presented. A ruling will be delivered within 10 business days. The gavel hit once more. The courtroom buzzed with polite motion, chairs scraping, whispers building. My attorney leaned in to say something, but I was already standing. I didn't need reassurance. Outside, the reporters waited like birds on a wire. Microphones and recorders extended the moment I stepped onto the courthouse steps. Ms. Thorne, Mila.
Do you believe the judge will side with you? Did your sister ever try to settle privately? Any message for your mother? I paused just long enough to be heard, but not long enough to be cornered. Justice doesn't always come from a gavel, I said. Sometimes it's just the truth heard out loud. Then I walked away. 3 days after the hearing, I stood at the threshold of my mother's kitchen, the very place where all this had begun. The sunlight poured in through the half-laced curtains like it always did, warming the tiled floor, softening the edges of the cabinets that had stood in this house since I was a child. The difference now was me. I wasn't shaking anymore. I didn't ring the bell. I didn't knock. I didn't even go inside. I just stood there for a few moments, letting the silence between that house and me stretch as far as it needed to. Then I turned around and drove back home, back to the version of me that had been forged, not broken.
Later that evening, I found myself in my father's old study, the one I'd recreated in my own apartment with his desk, his reading lamp, and a worn leather chair that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and peppermint. I'd been meaning to go through the rest of the old boxes, but never quite found the courage. Or maybe, until now, the reason. In the bottom drawer, beneath old bank ledgers and a yellowed copy of the will, I found an envelope. My name was on it, his handwriting. There was no stamp, no date on the outside, just for Mila. My hands shook, not from fear, but from reverence, as I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a letter dated 3 months before his passing. I sat down on the floor and unfolded it carefully, as if it might fall apart in my hands. Mila, it began. I always knew you saw what others missed. That's why I trusted you. That's why I made sure you'd be the one to carry forward what matters. Not the money, not the properties, the name. The value of things you can't appraise. I know it hasn't been easy, and I know you often feel out of place in this family, maybe because you were never willing to play the games they do. That isn't a weakness. It's the reason I believed in you more than I ever said aloud. Whatever happens, don't let them break you. And if they try, let them lose you. My throat tightened. I leaned back against the wall, the paper still in my hand, and let the tears come. But they weren't the bitter kind I'd shed before. These were different. These were the kind you cry when someone finally tells you they saw you, all along. I folded the letter and placed it in a small frame, not to hang on the wall, not for anyone else to read, just to remind myself. Seraphine, by then, had already begun to fall. It wasn't dramatic, not the kind of scandal that splashed across national headlines, but her largest investor pulled out, citing instability in leadership. Then came the board vote. She was asked to step down for the good of the brand. She posted a half-hearted apology the following day. It was vague, nothing about what she did, just the kind of performative humility that ended with a quote about new beginnings. Then she deleted her account. I didn't reach out. I didn't gloat. I didn't even feel satisfaction, just closure. And Valora? She disappeared in her own way. A neighbor who still talked to me mentioned they'd seen her walking at dawn, before the sun came up, bundled in a scarf and sunglasses, avoiding people, avoiding conversation. I didn't hate her, but I no longer owed her the version of myself that tried to earn her love. One morning, a few weeks later, I received an email from a local women's organization. They were hosting a seminar about financial abuse inside families, how manipulation and trust violations don't always look like violence. Someone had recommended me as a speaker. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Yes. The event was held in a modest conference room, folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, a worn podium. Nothing glamorous, but it was full. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, some who had never spoken of what they'd been through, some who had carried secrets for decades. When I stood at the podium, I didn't read from a script. I didn't wear a blazer. I didn't try to impress them. I just spoke. Sometimes, I began, the people who break us are the ones who raised us, and sometimes the ones who raise us think they're building strength, when really they're chiseling away at the voice inside us. I paused. But healing isn't about who apologizes, it's about who rebuilds, piece by piece. After the session, several women came up to hug me. One woman, maybe in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a braid, held my hand tightly and said, "You said everything I've never dared to." That night, back in my apartment, I placed the framed letter beside a new certificate, the official LLC registration for my consulting firm. My business, my name, no one else's. I didn't pour wine to celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there for a long time, looking at my father's photo and the document beside it. Two legacies, finally aligned. I inhaled deeply and let the quiet settle around me like a warm blanket. Not emptiness, not loneliness. Peace. They took pieces of me, but I gathered every one. And now, I walk whole. Sometimes, the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from the people who claim to love us most. This story isn't just about betrayal, it's about reclaiming your voice, even when that voice has been ignored for years. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family just to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. More true stories are coming. Stories that speak the truths many are still afraid to say out loud.